This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but after years of keeping it to myself, I need people to know what happened to me. Maybe someone will believe me, or maybe someone has experienced something similar. I don't know. All I know is that I'm still trying to make sense of it. This happened when I was 16, about 5 years ago now. My family lived in this small town called Pine Grove, one of those places where everyone knows everyone and nothing much happens. Our house was the last one on Cedar Lane, right at the edge of these really dense woods. I used to love those woods during the day. My friends and I would build forts there when we were younger. But at night, they turned into something else entirely. My parents had gone to some dinner party that night, a Friday in late October. Mom had left me money for pizza and told me not to wait up. It was around 8 p.m., and I was sitting at our kitchen table working on this stupid calculus homework that was due Monday. The house was quiet, except for the occasional creak of the old heating system kicking on. I remember I had my earbuds in, listening to music, when something made me pause my playlist. At first, I thought maybe it was my phone buzzing with a notification, but when I checked, there was nothing. Then I heard it again, faint but distinct. A woman's voice coming from somewhere outside. "Help. Please help me." It was distant, like it was coming from the edge of the woods behind our house. My first thought was that someone might be hurt, maybe a hiker who got lost or injured. I pulled out my earbuds completely and went to the back window to look out. It was pitch black outside except for our porch light, which only illuminated about 10 feet of the yard. "Hello?" I called out, pressing my face against the glass. "Is someone there?" The voice came again, a little louder this time. "Please, I need help." Something about it made the hair on my arm stand up. It sounded off, like it wasn't quite right. The pitch would change slightly between words, and there was this echo to it that didn't make sense. Sound doesn't echo in dense woods like ours. Still, what if someone was actually hurt out there? I couldn't just ignore it. I grabbed my phone and the big Maglite flashlight my dad kept by the back door. I told myself I'd just step out onto the porch and see if I could spot anyone. When I opened the back door, the cool air hit me immediately. It was one of those crisp fall nights where your breath makes little clouds. Our backyard looked normal, just the patio with the grill my dad had covered for winter, the old swing set my parents never got around to removing, and then about 50 feet of open grass before the tree line. "Hello?" I called out again, a bit louder. "Do you need help?" The voice responded immediately, like it had been waiting for me to ask again. "Yes, please help me. I'm lost." That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The voice wasn't coming from one location. It seemed to be coming from everywhere along the tree line at once, like it was surrounding the entire edge of the woods. I should have gone back inside right then. Every instinct was screaming at me to do exactly that. But I was 16 and stupid and still clinging to the rational explanation that someone needed help. I stepped off the porch, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness as I moved toward the woods. The beam only reached about 20 feet ahead, making the trees look like they were floating in blackness. "Where are you?" I called, my voice shaking a little. "I can't see you." "I'm here," the voice answered, suddenly sounding much closer. "Right here." I froze. The voice was now directly in front of me, at the edge of the tree line. I pointed my flashlight there and swung it back and forth, searching. That's when I saw her. At first, all I could make out was a shape standing perfectly still between two large pine trees. The figure was small, about my height, which is 5'4", and seemed to be wearing some kind of pale dress or gown. I couldn't see the face because her head was slightly tilted down. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper now. "Do you need me to call someone?" The figure didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. I took a few steps closer until I was about 20 feet from the tree line, close enough that my flashlight beam could fully illuminate her. I will never forget what I saw when she lifted her head. Her face was wrong. The skin was stretched too tight over her cheekbones, paper white and almost translucent, with blue-black veins visible underneath. Her eyes were sunken deep into their sockets and completely black, not just dark, but like empty holes. Her hair hung in long, matted clumps around her face, bits of leaves and dirt tangled in it like she'd been dragged through the forest floor. But it was her mouth that made me stumble backward. When she saw that I could see her clearly, her lips pulled back into what I guess was supposed to be a smile, but it stretched impossibly wide across her face, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. Too many teeth. No human mouth has that many teeth. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice suddenly crystal clear and no longer sounding like someone who needed help. It was cold and amused. "I've been so hungry." I dropped the flashlight and ran. I just turned and bolted back toward the house, nearly falling twice on the lawn. I could hear something moving behind me. Not footsteps exactly, more like a rapid rustling through the grass that was too fast to be a person running. I reached the back door, yanked it open, threw myself inside, and slammed it shut. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely lock it. Once I did, I backed away from the door, waiting to see if whatever that thing was would try to break in. The kitchen was silent for maybe 5 seconds. Then there was a soft tap on the glass of the back door. Tap, tap, tap. "Lily," the voice called, using my name though I'd never told her what it was. "Lily, please let me in. I'm so cold out here." I scrambled away from the door and into the living room, where I grabbed the house phone and dialed 911. While it rang, I ran around making sure every door and window in the house was locked. The voice followed me, somehow always right outside whichever room I was in. When I was checking the front windows, I saw it. She was standing on our front lawn now. Impossible, because she'd been at the back door just seconds earlier. There was no way she could have circled the house that quickly. The 911 operator finally answered, and I tried to explain what was happening through panicked sobs. The woman probably thought I was crazy or playing a prank, but she said they'd send someone to check it out. "Lily," the voice was at the front door now. "You know the police can't help you. They can't see me like you can." I was absolutely terrified. I ended up hiding in the downstairs bathroom, the only room in the house with no windows, with the door locked, sitting in the bathtub with a kitchen knife clutched in my hand. I could hear the voice moving around outside the house, sometimes whispering, sometimes singing my name like it was a nursery rhyme. When the police finally arrived about 15 minutes later, the voice went silent. I was still in the bathroom when they knocked, and it took them calling out, "Police department," several times before I worked up the courage to come out. 2 officers searched the entire property while I sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in a blanket. They found nothing. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been in our yard or at the edge of the woods. They clearly didn't believe me. I could tell by the way they exchanged looks when I described what I'd seen. "Probably just some teenagers from town playing a prank," one of them suggested. "Halloween's coming up. People do stupid things." But I knew what I'd seen wasn't a costume or a prank. No mask could look that wrong, and no human could move that fast around our house. The officers stayed until my parents got home and explained to them what had happened. My dad was concerned. My mom was convinced I'd fallen asleep while studying and had a nightmare, or that I was making it up for attention. We didn't move away immediately. My parents wouldn't even consider it. They thought I was just going through a phase or something. But I refused to be alone in that house again. I stayed with friends after school if my parents weren't going to be home, and I kept my bedroom blinds closed at all times. I swear sometimes at night I would see that figure standing at the edge of the woods, just watching our house. 3 months after it happened, I thought I was starting to get over it. Then one night, I was in my bedroom when my phone dinged with a text. It was from an unknown number, and all it said was, "I'm still waiting for you, Lily." I looked out my window, and there she was, standing in our backyard, looking up at my window. Even from the second floor, I could see that horrible smile. We finally moved away the following summer when my dad got a job offer in another state. I've never been so relieved about anything in my life. It's been 5 years now, and I've mostly convinced myself that I can put it behind me. But last week, I got another text from an unknown number. "I found you, Lily." I'm writing this from my college dorm room, over 500 miles away from Pine Grove. I keep telling myself it's just someone playing a cruel joke. But tonight, for the first time since we moved, I thought I heard a woman's voice outside my window, calling for help. I know she's out there. I know she's real. And I know that whatever was in those woods that night is still there, still waiting, still hungry. If you ever find yourself near Pine Grove, especially near those woods at the end of Cedar Lane, please, don't answer if you hear someone calling for help. This happened 5 years ago when I was 16. I grew up in Millfield, one of those small towns where everybody knows your business and historic homes are the town's claim to fame. My family's house wasn't exactly famous, but it had been in my dad's family for 4 generations. A big Victorian with creaky floors, weird angles, and that musty smell old houses never seemed to shake. My parents were celebrating their 20th anniversary that night. They'd been planning it for months. Dinner at Castelli's, the fancy Italian restaurant about an hour away in the city. Mom had bought a new dress, and Dad even dusted off his one good suit. They deserved the night out. I insisted I'd be fine staying home alone. I wasn't a kid anymore. The forecast had predicted rain, but what rolled in that evening was more like the apocalypse. The rain started around 5 p.m., hammering against the windows with this angry, persistent rhythm. By 6:30, when my parents left, the wind had picked up too. Dad asked if I was sure I'd be okay, and I practically shoved them out the door. I remember Mom's worried face as they pulled out of the driveway, rain splattering against the windshield. "We'll be back by midnight," she yelled over the storm. "Call if you need anything." I had the whole night planned, frozen pizza, Netflix, and maybe a face mask, simple teenage stuff. The house felt different when they left, larger somehow. I'd been home alone plenty of times before, but something about the storm made everything feel off-kilter. I stuck my pizza in the oven and went upstairs to change into sweatpants. That's when I heard it for the first time, a dull thump from somewhere below. I froze, my jeans halfway up my legs. It could have been anything. The wind knocking something over outside, the old pipes groaning, the house settling. Old houses make weird noises all the time, right? But then it happened again. Thump, louder this time. I pulled my pants up and stood still, listening. Nothing for maybe 30 seconds, then thump, definitely from downstairs. My first instinct was to text my friend Jess, but my phone showed no service. The storm must have knocked out a cell tower. Great timing. I went downstairs, trying to convince myself it was just the wind. The pizza in the oven filled the kitchen with the smell of cheese and tomato sauce, almost normal enough to calm me down. As I waited, I kept hearing it. Thump, 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 irregular but persistent. It was coming from below the kitchen, the basement. Our basement was the worst part of the house. Low ceilings, bare bulbs hanging from exposed wires, concrete floors, always slightly damp. Dad used it for storage, and Mom refused to go down there because of the spiders. I hadn't been down there in months. The thumping continued, growing more insistent. Maybe a pipe was about to burst, or an animal had gotten trapped. With the storm, it could be anything, and if I didn't check, I might end up with a flooded basement or worse. The basement door was in the hallway between the kitchen and living room. I stood in front of it, my heart pounding stupidly fast. This was ridiculous. I was freaking myself out over nothing. Taking a deep breath, I flicked on the stairwell light and pulled open the door. The smell hit me first, musty and damp, but with something else underneath, something sour, like old sweat or spoiled meat. The wooden stairs disappeared into the dim light below, the single bulb at the bottom barely cutting through the darkness. Thump. This time I felt it, a vibration through the floorboards under my feet. It was definitely coming from down there. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. Of course, no one would answer. It was just me being stupid. I took the first step down, the old wood creaking beneath my weight. Then another. With each step, the thumping seemed to pause, as if whatever was making the noise was listening to me too. The stairs felt endless. My hand gripped the railing so tight my knuckles hurt. By the time I reached the bottom, my heart was hammering in my chest. The basement was a cluttered maze of old furniture, holiday decorations, and boxes of stuff we never used but couldn't throw away. The bare bulb cast long shadows that shifted as I moved. Water leaked somewhere in the darkness, a steady drip, drip, drip mixing with the sound of rain pounding above. "Hello?" I called again, feeling like an idiot. "Is something making that noise?" Silence. Even the thumping had stopped. I walked deeper into the basement, navigating around stacked boxes and my dad's workbench. The old furnace sat in one corner, humming softly. Nothing seemed out of place or damaged. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. That's when I noticed the pile of moving blankets in the far corner. We used them whenever we had to transport furniture, but they were usually stored in a plastic bin. These were lumped on the floor in a weird heap, like someone had hastily thrown them there. I approached slowly, the concrete cold through my socks. The blankets seemed to shift slightly. Maybe a raccoon or stray cat had gotten in and made a nest. I picked up a broom leaning against the wall, ready to shoo whatever it was toward the small basement window. "Hey," I said, poking the blankets with the broom handle, "get out of here." The pile didn't move, but I heard a strange sound, like someone breathing through their teeth. My entire body went cold. That wasn't an animal. I should have run right then. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around and get upstairs, but some stupid part of me needed to know, needed to see what was under there. I reached out with trembling fingers and grabbed the edge of the top blanket. I pulled it away in one quick motion. The scream died in my throat when I saw him. A man, curled up among the blankets, staring up at me with wild, bloodshot eyes. His skin was so pale it looked gray in the dim light, stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. His hair was matted and filthy, his clothes stained and torn. But it was his expression that paralyzed me. A mixture of surprise and something else, something hungry. For one endless second, we just stared at each other. Then his cracked lips spread into a smile, revealing yellowed teeth. "Found me," he whispered, his voice like sandpaper. I dropped the blanket and stumbled backward, knocking into a stack of boxes that crashed to the floor. The man lunged forward, blankets falling away as he scrambled toward me on all fours, fast, too fast, like some horrible spider. I turned and ran, tripping over the fallen boxes, my elbow smashing against the concrete as I fell. Pain shot up my arm, but adrenaline pushed me back to my feet. I could hear him behind me, his breathing quick and excited. The stairs. I just needed to reach the stairs. I threw myself toward them, taking them two at a time, my sock-covered feet slipping on the worn wood. He was right behind me. I could feel his presence, hear his labored breathing. Something brushed against my ankle, his fingers, and I kicked back blindly, connecting with something solid. There was a grunt and the sound of him stumbling, buying me precious seconds. I reached the top of the stairs and slammed the door shut, my shaking hands fumbling with the lock. The click of it sliding into place felt like the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. Bang! The door shuddered as he threw himself against it from the other side. "Let me out!" he screamed, his voice muffled but clear enough to freeze my blood. "Let me out!" I backed away, unable to breathe. The door shook with each impact as he threw himself against it again and again. The wood began to splinter around the hinges. I needed to call 911. My cell still had no service, but we had a landline in the kitchen. I ran there, grabbed the receiver, and dialed with trembling fingers. Nothing. The line was dead. The storm must have knocked out the phones too. Crack! A louder sound from the hallway. I peeked around the corner to see the basement door bulging outward. A fist-sized hole punched through the middle. Dirty fingers wiggled through the gap, trying to reach the lock. I was trapped. No phone, no way to call for help, and a madman breaking through the door. The kitchen, weapons. I yanked open drawers until I found the biggest knife we had. I'd never hurt anyone before, never even thought about it. But in that moment, I knew I would if I had to. Crash. The basement door gave way, splintering from its hinges. I heard him stumble into the hallway, his breathing heavy and wet. "Pretty girl," he called out, his voice sing-song and terrible. "Where are you hiding?" I pressed myself against the kitchen wall, knife clutched in my sweating hand. "Think, Cassie, think." Front door? Too far. I'd have to cross the hallway where he was. Back door? Through the mudroom, just off the kitchen. That was my best chance. I inched toward the mudroom door, trying to be silent. Outside was pouring rain and darkness, but anything was better than being trapped with him. His footsteps shuffled closer, pausing at the kitchen entrance. I could smell him now, that same sour stench from the basement, but stronger. Unwashed body, dirt, something rotting. "I can hear you breathing," he whispered. I ran. Bolting for the mudroom, I heard him behind me, moving faster than someone so gaunt should be able to. I slammed the mudroom door in his face and fumbled with the back door's deadbolt. It stuck. It always stuck in humid weather, and tonight it wouldn't budge, no matter how hard I twisted. The mudroom door burst open. He stood there, swaying slightly, his face split in that terrible smile. Up close, I could see dark stains on his clothes, the dirt under his broken fingernails, the sores around his mouth. "Nowhere left to run," he said, taking a step toward me. I raised the knife. "Stay back. I'll use this." He laughed, a high-pitched giggle that didn't match his body. "No, you won't. You're too soft." Another step closer. "I've been watching you for days. So soft." Days? He'd been in our house for days. When he lunged, I slashed wildly with the knife. I felt it connect, heard him hiss in pain, but then his body slammed into mine, knocking me against the wall. The knife clattered to the floor. His hands found my throat, fingers digging into my skin, cutting off my air. I fought. I kicked and scratched and punched, but he was stronger than he looked. Black spots appeared at the edges of my vision as his thumbs pressed deeper into my windpipe. His face was inches from mine, those wild eyes staring directly into me, watching the life drain away. This was it. I was going to die in my own home with my parents miles away, unaware. Then, through the roaring in my ears, I heard it. Sirens, faint at first, then growing louder. The man heard them too. His grip loosened just enough for me to gasp a breath. Confusion crossed his face, followed by anger. "Who did you call?" he snarled, shaking me. "Who did you call?" I couldn't answer, couldn't speak at all. But the sirens were definitely getting closer. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows, illuminating his face in alternating colors. He released me suddenly, and I collapsed to the floor, coughing and gulping air. He backed away, looking around wildly like a cornered animal. "No, no, no," he muttered. "Not yet. Not finished." The front door burst open with a crash. "Police! Hands up!" Everything happened so fast after that. Officers swarmed in, guns drawn. The man tried to run back through the kitchen but was tackled to the ground. I remember screaming, "Was that me?" and someone helping me up, asking if I was okay. I couldn't stop shaking. An officer wrapped a blanket around my shoulders while others handcuffed the man and dragged him outside to a waiting patrol car. He fought the whole way, twisting and jerking, his eyes never leaving me. "How did you know?" I asked the officer beside me. "How did you know to come?" She looked confused. "We got a 911 call from this address, came in about 10 minutes ago." But that was impossible. I hadn't been able to call anyone. Later, at the police station, they told me the man was a drifter named Michael Keene. He had a history of breaking into homes in other states, sometimes living in them for days while the owners went about their lives, unaware. They found his fingerprints all over our basement, on the water heater, the furnace, even the underside of the kitchen floorboards. He had been listening to us walking above him, tracking our movements. When they searched the basement more thoroughly, they found a small hole he'd made in the foundation, barely big enough for a person to squeeze through. He'd covered it with some old wooden pallets from outside. That's how he'd been getting in and out. But the part that still haunts me, the part I can't explain, is the 911 call. The police played it for my parents when they finally reached them. It was just heavy breathing and a whispered address, our address, before the line went dead. The call hadn't come from our landline. It hadn't come from any phone in our house. To this day, I don't know who made that call. I don't know how long he had been living beneath us before I found him. I don't know what he planned to do if the police hadn't arrived when they did. I still live with my parents. I'm in college now, but can't bring myself to move into a dorm. I still wake up some nights thinking I hear thumping from below. I still check the locks 3 times before bed. The therapist says I'm making progress, but there are things you don't just get over. Knowing someone was watching you, living right beneath your feet, breathing the same air. It changes how you see everything. Every creaking floorboard, every shadow, every sound in the night. Someone saved my life that night by making that call. But sometimes I wonder, if they knew he was there, why didn't they warn us sooner? I felt so grown up. This was the first time they'd ever left me completely alone overnight. Usually they'd call Aunt Karen or Mrs. Peterson next door, but everything happened so fast with Mom, and honestly, I'd been begging them to stop getting babysitters for months. "I'm double digits now," I kept saying. That first hour alone was awesome. I made myself a pizza pocket, grabbed a 2-liter of Mountain Dew, usually off limits on school nights, and settled in for a marathon of movies I normally wasn't allowed to watch. Nothing super scary, just PG-13 stuff I'd been dying to see. Around 10 p.m., Dad called to say Mom was doing well, but that these things take time. He told me to go to bed by 11, but of course I didn't. How could I possibly sleep? This was freedom. By midnight, I was starting to get tired, but I fought to keep my eyes open. I'd built this little nest on the couch with my favorite blanket and pillows. Our house was super quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator and occasional car passing outside. We lived in what my parents called a good neighborhood in Oakdale, the kind of place where some people still left their doors unlocked, though my parents never did. At some point around 1 a.m., I must have dozed off because I jolted awake suddenly, my heart racing. At first, I couldn't figure out what woke me. Then I heard it, a soft scratching sound coming from the front door. I froze, Mountain Dew can halfway to my mouth. The scratching continued, followed by a metallic sound that I recognized from when Dad would unlock the door. Except Dad wasn't due home for hours, and he would have called first. The porch light was off, but through the living room window I could see a shadow moving on the front porch. Not my parents' shapes, someone else, someone trying to get in. My throat closed up. This wasn't supposed to happen in real life. This was movie stuff. The doorknob jiggled. Then a whispered voice. "Taking too long. Try the back." There were at least 2 of them. I don't remember deciding to move. My body just went into autopilot. I slid off the couch and crawled across the living room floor, keeping below window level. Our house wasn't big, just a single-story ranch with 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, living room, and 2 bathrooms. Nowhere really safe to hide except the hall closet. Dad kept his winter coats there, plus our vacuum and some storage boxes. It was deep and dark and had those slatted doors that I could see through just a little. I slipped inside, pushing myself to the very back corner behind Dad's puffy winter coat. I pulled a couple of blankets from the shelf over me, trying to make myself as small as possible. My hands were shaking so bad I had to clamp them between my knees. Then I heard it. The sound of breaking glass from the kitchen. A window. They were actually breaking in. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry for my parents. But some instinct kept me silent, breathing through my mouth to stay quiet. I closed my eyes tight, then opened them again because the darkness behind my eyelids felt worse. Footsteps, multiple sets, heavy ones, trying to be quiet but failing on our squeaky hardwood floors. "Check the bedrooms," a man's voice whispered. "I'll take the living room. 15 minutes, tops." They were inside my house. Strangers were inside my house, and I was alone. I could hear them moving around systematically, opening drawers, closets, cabinet doors, the sound of things being dumped onto floors. "Kid's room," one of them muttered, close enough that I could hear him through the hall. "Nobody home." My room. They were in my room, touching my stuff. The thought made me feel sick and violated in a way I couldn't really understand at 10 years old. More sounds of rummaging, a thud that I recognized as my piggy bank hitting the floor. I'd been saving for a new bike, $43.17. I remembered the exact amount, then footsteps coming down the hall, right toward me. I stopped breathing entirely. The footsteps paused right outside the closet. I could see a shadow through the slats. A large man wearing what looked like a dark hoodie. The closet door slid open part way. I curled into the smallest ball I could, pressing myself against the wall, willing myself to disappear into the coats. I could smell the man, cigarettes and something chemical. He reached in, his hand inches from my face, and grabbed Dad's leather jacket from the hanger. "Nice," he muttered, and for one horrible second I thought he was talking about finding me, but he was just taking the jacket. He slid the door partly closed again, not bothering to check the back of the closet where I was hidden. I stayed frozen, not daring to move a muscle. My leg was cramping badly, but I didn't shift position. I was terrified that even the sound of my breathing might give me away. "Got the electronics," someone called from the living room. "TV's too big to move quick, taking the laptop and tablets." "Hurry up," another voice replied. "Check the main bedroom again. Look for jewelry boxes, cash stashes." I kept track of them by sound. One in my parents' bedroom, one in the living room, maybe a third in the kitchen or bathroom. They were fast and seemed to know exactly what to look for. From my parents' room, jackpot, found the jewelry box. My mom's jewelry box, the one with her grandmother's wedding ring, the necklace Dad got her when I was born, her special things. I wanted to scream at them to stop, to leave her things alone, but I bit down on my fist instead, tasting salt from either sweat or tears. I couldn't tell which. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours. I lost track of time completely, focusing only on staying still, staying silent. My body ached from the unnatural position. My bladder felt like it might burst from fear and all that Mountain Dew. But somehow I held it. "Time," one of them finally said. "Let's move." Footsteps again, heading toward the front door this time. "You checked the hall closet?" one asked. My heart nearly stopped. "Already grabbed the coats," came the reply. "Just making sure." "Please, please, please," I thought, squeezing my eyes shut again. The footsteps paused outside the closet, then mercifully moved on. I heard the front door open, voices murmuring, then the door closed. I didn't move. What if it was a trick? What if one stayed behind? I don't know how long I stayed in that closet after they left. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe an hour. I just kept listening, straining to hear any sound of movement in the house. Finally, when my legs couldn't take it anymore, I pushed the closet door open just a crack. The hallway was dark and silent. I slid out, staying low, and crept toward the living room. The house was destroyed, cushions slashed open, drawers emptied onto the floor, picture frames smashed. Our TV was still there, but the smaller electronics were gone. Dad's laptop, Mom's iPad, my Nintendo Switch. The kitchen was a mess of open cabinets and scattered utensils. I checked every room, every closet, under every bed, making sure they were really gone. When I was absolutely certain I was alone, I went to the phone in the kitchen. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to dial 911 3 times before getting it right. 911, what's your emergency? The woman's voice sounded far away. Someone broke into our house, I said, my voice coming out as a whisper. I'm alone. I'm 10. My parents are at the hospital having a baby. Are they still in the house, honey? She asked, her tone changing immediately. No, they left, but they took stuff. They were right next to me. I hid in the closet. You did exactly the right thing, she said. I'm sending officers right now. Can you tell me your address? I gave her our address. She told me to lock myself in a bathroom until the police arrived, but I couldn't bear the thought of hiding again. Instead, I sat on the kitchen floor, back against the wall, where I could see both the front and back doors. The police arrived with flashing lights. 2 officers, a man and a woman. They checked the entire house again, took pictures of the mess, and asked me questions. They seemed impressed that I'd hidden and stayed quiet. "Smart kid," the male officer said. "They asked if I wanted to go to the hospital to be with my parents, but I couldn't leave the house. What if the burglars came back? What if they took more things? I needed to protect what was left." I called my parents from the police officer's phone. Dad answered, sounding tired but happy, until I told him what happened. I could hear his voice change, the joy draining away. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" he kept asking. "No, I hid. They didn't see me," I told him. He wanted to come home immediately, but I told him to stay with Mom. The police were with me. I was okay. I wasn't, but I wanted him to stay with my new sister. The female officer stayed with me the rest of the night while her partner patrolled outside. She tried to get me to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the closet door sliding open, the hand reaching in. Morning came eventually. The officers had contacted our neighbors, and Mrs. Peterson came over around 6 a.m. with breakfast I couldn't eat. My stomach was still tied in knots. When my parents finally came home around 9 a.m., there were still police cars in our driveway. I was sitting on the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket, even though it wasn't cold. I'll never forget the look on my dad's face. The joy of holding my newborn sister mixed with horror as he took in the police cars and state of our house. Mom was crying, clutching the baby carrier to her chest. They rushed to me, Dad kneeling down just like he had the evening before, except this time his hands were shaking as they gripped my shoulders. "I'm so sorry," he kept saying. "I'm so sorry we weren't here." The following days blur together in my memory. The police took fingerprints but never caught anyone. Insurance covered some of the stolen items, but not the things that mattered most. Mom's family heirlooms, the sense of safety I'd always taken for granted. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep alone. Every noise made me jump. I'd check the locks on the doors and windows multiple times before bed. I was afraid of the dark for the first time since I was little. The hardest part wasn't the stuff they took. It was knowing that strangers had been in our space, touching our things, violating our home while I hid, terrified, in a closet. We got a security system installed. Dad started talking about moving to a better neighborhood, though we ended up staying. Mom would check on me multiple times each night. I think she felt guilty, though it wasn't her fault. My sister's first weeks at home were nothing like they were supposed to be. Instead of celebrating, we were picking up pieces, filing police reports, and jumping at shadows. It's been years now, but I still can't stand the sound of scratching at a door. I still sleep with my bedroom door closed and locked. I still wake up sometimes, heart pounding, thinking I hear footsteps in the hallway. The burglars took more than our stuff that night. They took my childhood sense that home meant safety. They took my parents' peace of mind. They took something I can never get back. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, I still wonder, what if they had opened that closet door all the way? What if they had looked behind those coats? What if they come back someday, remembering what they left behind? I've been debating whether to post this for months. I'm still struggling to make sense of what happened, and part of me is afraid that putting it into words might somehow make it worse. But I can't keep this bottled up anymore. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar, or can offer an explanation that doesn't make me feel like I'm losing my mind. This happened last October. I've always been what you'd call a night owl. When everyone else is winding down, I'm usually wide awake, and I've developed this habit of taking late-night drives to clear my head. There's something about being alone on empty roads when the rest of the world is asleep that's always brought me peace. The stillness, you know? It feels like you have the whole world to yourself for a little while. I live in Ravenwood. a small town surrounded by dense forests and winding back roads. Most nights I'd just drive around town, but sometimes I'd venture out to the country roads or skirt along the edge of Blackwater Forest. Looking back, it's crazy how comfortable I was driving those isolated routes alone at night. I never felt afraid, not until that night anyway. It was around 1:30 a.m. when I left my buddy Chris's place. We'd been playing video games and lost track of time, as usual. It wasn't anything special, just a normal Thursday night hanging out. The weather was typical for October in our area, chilly but not freezing, with this low-hanging fog that made the headlights bounce back at you in certain spots. I decided to take the back roads home instead of the highway. It would take longer, but I wasn't in any rush, and the drive through the wooded areas near Blackwater Forest was usually peaceful. There's this particular stretch that winds for about 7 miles, with nothing but trees on both sides, and the occasional dirt road leading to who knows where. The moment I turned onto Raven Creek Road, the main back road that cuts alongside the forest, I felt something was off. I can't explain exactly what it was at first. The road seemed darker than usual, even with my headlights on high beam. The trees looked different somehow. I know that sounds stupid, but they seemed to lean in toward the road more than I remembered, like they were reaching out with these long, bony branches. I remember checking my phone. No signal, which wasn't unusual for that area. I turned up the radio to distract myself from the growing unease, but there was nothing but static on every station. Even my saved Spotify playlist wouldn't load. The silence was getting to me, so I started humming to myself. About 3 miles down Raven Creek Road, I realized I hadn't seen another car since I'd turned off the main highway. That wasn't necessarily strange for that time of night, but it added to the isolation I was beginning to feel. The fog was getting thicker, reducing visibility to maybe 30 feet ahead of my car. I slowed down to about 35 km/h, squinting through the windshield and gripping the steering wheel tighter. That's when I heard it. A scream. A woman's scream, high-pitched and terrified, coming from somewhere in the forest to my right. It was so sudden and so clear that I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding slightly before coming to a stop in the middle of the empty road. I sat there for a moment, heart pounding, wondering if I'd imagined it. Then it came again, a desperate, agonized scream that made my skin crawl. It sounded like someone was being attacked or tortured. I'm not sure why I didn't just call 911 and keep driving. Maybe because I knew there was no signal, or maybe because some stupid part of me thought I could help. Whatever the reason, I pulled my car to the side of the road, grabbed my phone and the heavy Maglite flashlight I keep in my glove compartment, and got out. The air was colder than I expected, with a damp chill that seemed to seep through my jacket instantly. The forest was eerily silent now, no screams, just the faint rustling of leaves in the light breeze. I turned on my flashlight and pointed it toward the trees. The beam barely penetrated the dense undergrowth. "Hello," I called out, immediately regretting how small my voice sounded in the vastness of the dark woods. "Is someone there? Do you need help?" No response. I stood by my car for another minute, listening intently. Just as I was beginning to think I'd imagined the whole thing, I heard it again, the same terrified scream, but fainter now, as if the person was moving deeper into the forest. Every instinct was telling me to get back in my car and drive away as fast as possible. But what if someone really was hurt? What if some woman was being attacked and I was her only chance? I'd never be able to live with myself if I just left. So I did the stupidest thing possible. I stepped into the forest. The moment I crossed from the road into the trees, the temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. My flashlight created weird shifting shadows as I moved, making it look like the darkness itself was alive and dancing around me. The ground was soft and damp under my feet, covered with rotting leaves that muffled my footsteps. I tried to keep track of how far I was going, making sure I could find my way back to the road. The screams had stopped again, but I continued in the direction where I'd last heard them, calling out occasionally to let the person know help was coming. I must have walked for about 5 minutes, though it felt much longer. The trees grew thicker the further I went, branches snagging on my clothes and scratching at my face. The fog had followed me into the forest, hanging between the trees like ghostly curtains. My flashlight beam seemed to be getting weaker too, the circle of light growing smaller and dimmer with each passing minute. Then suddenly, complete silence fell. Not just the absence of screams, but an unnatural stillness where even the rustle of leaves and the normal sounds of the forest had disappeared. The air felt heavy, pressing against my ears like I was deep underwater. I stopped walking, swinging my flashlight around in a slow circle, trying to penetrate the wall of darkness surrounding me. That's when I heard the whisper, "Help me." It was directly behind me, so close I could feel the words more than hear them. A soft, feminine voice right against my ear. I spun around, heart nearly exploding from my chest, but there was nothing there. Just more trees, more darkness. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Where are you? I want to help." "Help me," came the whisper again, now from somewhere to my left. "Please help me." I turned toward the voice, my flashlight beam cutting through the fog. Nothing. "Where are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I can't see you." "I'm right here," the voice replied, now from a different direction. "So close. Come closer." Something about the way the voice said those last words made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. There was a subtle shift in the tone, still soft and feminine, but with something else underneath, something hungry. I started backing up, trying to remember which direction led back to the road. The voice came again, this time from multiple directions at once, as if I was surrounded. "Don't leave me. I need you. I'm so alone." The pleading tone was gone now, replaced by something more insistent, more demanding. And with each repetition, the voice sounded less human. I turned and started walking quickly in what I hoped was the direction of the road. The voice followed me, growing louder and more distorted with each repetition. "Help me! Help me! Help me!" The last one was nearly a shriek, and it was right behind me. I felt something cold brush against the back of my neck, like fingers made of ice. And that was it. I broke into a run, not caring about the branches whipping my face or the roots threatening to trip me with every step. Pure adrenaline took over, driving me forward as the voice continued to call after me, transforming from pleading to threatening. "You can't leave me here. Come back. Come back." I don't know how long I ran or how I managed to find my way back, but suddenly the trees thinned out, and I could see the glint of my car's reflection in the moonlight. I burst out of the forest, gasping for breath, my clothes damp with sweat despite the cold. As I staggered toward my car, fumbling for my keys, I glanced back at the forest edge, and that's when I saw her. At first it was just a darker shadow among the trees, a vague, human-shaped outline standing perfectly still at the forest's edge. As I stared, unable to look away, the shadow seemed to solidify, taking the form of a woman. She was too far away, and it was too dark to make out detailed features, but I could see that she was wearing what looked like a long, pale dress or nightgown. Her hair hung in dark tangles around her face. What happened next still haunts my nightmares. She began moving toward me, but not by walking. It was like she was being pulled forward while her feet remained stationary. a smooth, unnatural gliding motion that covered ground with impossible speed. I practically threw myself into my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed it into drive, tires spinning on the damp asphalt as I accelerated away. In my rearview mirror, I could see the pale figure standing in the middle of the road where my car had been parked, growing smaller as I sped away. I drove home like a maniac, blowing through stop signs and taking turns so fast my tires squealed in protest. The whole time, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that gliding figure somehow keeping pace with my car. When I finally got home, I locked every door and window, then sat in my living room with all the lights on until morning. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I closed my eyes, even for a second, I'd open them to find that woman's face inches from mine. The next day, still shaken and operating on zero sleep, I saw a news report that made my blood run cold. A woman's body had been discovered in Blackwater Forest, near Raven Creek Road. The report didn't give many details, just that hikers had found her early that morning and that authorities were investigating. But the reporter mentioned one detail that still makes me sick to my stomach. The woman's body showed signs of having been there for several days, and her face was frozen in an expression of extreme terror. I've gone back and forth about whether to go to the police. What would I even say? That I heard a ghost calling for help? That I was chased by something that moved like no living person could move? They'd think I was either crazy or somehow involved in whatever happened to that poor woman. It's been months now, and I've never driven that route again. I've actually stopped taking night drives altogether. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed trying to fall asleep, I think I can hear that whisper again. Help me, coming from just outside my window. And I know deep down that if I ever answer that call again, I'll never come back from Blackwater Forest. I still don't know what I encountered that night. Was it the ghost of that woman they found? Something that killed her? Or something else entirely? All I know is that the dark isn't empty, and sometimes when you hear someone calling for help in the night, it's not because they need saving. It's because they've found their next victim. I've picked up hitchhikers my whole life. My dad did it, and he taught me to trust my gut. Said a good salesman can read people. That was 27 years on the road selling farm equipment across Millfield County and never once had a problem. Until 3 months ago. I still can't sleep right. My wife says I need therapy. But how do you explain something like this to a therapist without sounding completely insane? It was late, around midnight, and I was driving back from a sales conference in Henderson. It's about a 3-hour drive on mostly empty highways through farmland and patches of forest. I was tired but alert enough, had my thermos of coffee and the radio playing softly. The roads were dead empty like they usually are that time of night. Clear skies, almost full moon, perfect visibility. I remember checking my gas gauge when I passed the Welcome to Millfield County sign. Still had half a tank, enough to get home without stopping. That's when I first saw him, standing on the shoulder just beyond the county line. He wasn't thumbing a ride like most hitchhikers, just standing there, staring at my headlights as I approached. Something about him made me slow down instinctively. I can't explain why I stopped. Any other night I would have kept driving. He was young, maybe early 20s, thin build, had on jeans and a gray hoodie that seemed too big for him, carrying a beat-up backpack. When my headlights hit him full on, I noticed his eyes. They looked hollow. Not drugged out hollow, but empty, like someone who'd seen too much. His face was pale, with several days of stubble, and his clothes were dirty, but not filthy. I rolled down the passenger window and asked where he was headed. He just stared at me for a moment before saying, "Wherever you're going." His voice was flat, emotionless. Against every warning bell going off in my head, I unlocked the door. "I'm heading to Westbrook, about 40 miles up the road." He got in without another word, placed his backpack between his feet, and clicked his seatbelt. I remember thinking that was oddly cautious for someone who looked so careless about everything else. "Name's Thomas," I said, trying to be friendly while pulling back onto the empty highway. He didn't respond, just nodded slightly, didn't offer his name in return. "Bad night to be out walking," I tried again. "Not much out here for miles." "I've been in worse places," he mumbled, staring straight ahead. We drove in silence for a few minutes. I had the heat on, but the car felt cold somehow. I noticed he kept glancing at the rearview mirror. "Expecting someone?" I asked. His eyes snapped to mine for just a second. "No, just a habit." I've picked up all kinds of people over the years, farm workers, college kids, people down on their luck. Usually they want to talk, they've got stories, or they're grateful for the ride. This guy was different. The silence felt heavy, pressurized. "Where you coming from?" I asked, trying one more time to establish some normality. "Does it matter?" he replied, still watching the road. "Just making conversation." He turned to look at me then, really look at me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. His eyes caught the glow from the dashboard, making them look almost reflective, like an animal's. "I've been walking a long time," he finally said. "Longer than you can imagine." I nodded like I understood, even though I didn't. I figured maybe he was a veteran or something, dealing with PTSD. I've picked up vets before. "You got family in Westbrook?" I asked. He laughed then, a short, humorless sound. No family anywhere." We passed the exit for Old Creek Road, which meant we were about 25 miles from Westbrook. The highway stretched empty ahead of us, the trees making dark walls on either side. My headlights only illuminated about 50 feet ahead. Beyond that was pitch black. No other cars in sight. The hitchhiker shifted in his seat, leaning forward slightly. I noticed his hands were unnaturally pale, the nails bitten down to the quick. There was dirt under what was left of them. "You ever wonder what it's like?" he asked suddenly. What's like?" "To die." The question hung in the air between us. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles whitening. "Can't say that I have," I lied. "Everyone thinks about death sometimes." "I have," he said, his voice oddly calm. "I died, you know." Now, I've heard some strange things from hitchhikers before. People tell all kinds of stories when they're in a car with a stranger they'll never see again. But something in his voice made the hair on my arms stand up. "Is that right?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Not quickly," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "Slowly, painfully. Takes a long time when you're trapped." I glanced at him. He was staring straight ahead, but there was something different about his expression now. More intense. His fingers were tapping rhythmically against his knee. "Trapped how?" I found myself asking, even though every instinct told me to shut up and drive faster. "Between places," he said. "Between moments. Between breaths." He turned to look at me again. "Do you ever feel like you're not really here? Like you're watching yourself from somewhere else?" My mouth felt dry. "Can't say that I do." He nodded, as if that was exactly the answer he expected. "I'm trapped in it, in that moment. I can't move forward, can't go back. Just stuck." I checked the odometer. Still 18 miles to Westbrook. The night seemed to have gotten darker somehow, the trees closer to the road. No matter how far I run, he continued, his voice dropping lower, I can't escape it. It follows me everywhere. What does? I asked, even though I didn't want to know. Death, he said simply. My death, over and over and over. My palms were sweating now, making the steering wheel slippery. I tightened my grip. Sounds rough, I managed to say, keeping my eyes fixed on the road. He laughed again, that same cold sound. You have no idea. The temperature in the car seemed to drop. I reached to turn up the heat, but before I could, he spoke again. Do you want to know what it feels like? His voice had changed, become more intense. Do you want to know what it's like to die? He was leaning toward me now, invading my space. I could smell him, not body odor, but something else, something cold and earthy, like freshly dug soil. Not particularly, I said, trying to sound casual while edging as far away as I could without driving off the road. It starts with the realization, he said, ignoring my answer. The moment you know it's happening, there's this clarity. Everything becomes very sharp, very present. You notice details you never saw before. I swallowed hard. Look, maybe we should just ride quietly for a while. Then comes the fear, he continued, his voice almost a whisper now. Not the kind of fear you feel watching a horror movie or walking alone at night. Real fear, primal. It fills every cell in your body until you're nothing but fear. The mile markers were passing too slowly. I was going 70, but it felt like we were crawling. And then the pain, he said, leaning even closer. I could feel his breath against my ear. The pain is magnificent. It consumes you, becomes you. That's enough, I said firmly, pressing myself against the driver's side door. I don't want to hear any more. He didn't seem to hear me. His eyes were wide now, fixed on something I couldn't see. And just when you think it can't get worse, you realize you're stuck. That this moment, this terrible, painful, frightening moment, is where you'll live forever. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. We were still 10 miles from Westbrook. The highway stretched endlessly ahead. Do you know what that's like, Thomas? He asked, using my name for the first time. To be trapped in your worst moment forever? I couldn't speak. My mouth had gone completely dry. He reached out then and touched my arm. His fingers were ice cold through my shirt sleeve. I could show you, he whispered. Right now, I could show you exactly what it feels like. I jerked my arm away, nearly swerving into the other lane. Don't touch me, I snapped. He smiled then, a terrible empty smile that didn't reach his eyes. Don't worry, he said, his voice suddenly lighter. It's not your time yet. He leaned back in his seat as if the last few minutes hadn't happened. But it will be, someday. That was it. I'd had enough. I didn't care anymore about being polite or helpful or any of that. I hit the brakes hard, the car fishtailing slightly as we skidded to a stop on the empty highway. Get out, I said, my voice shaking. Get out of my car right now. He looked at me with those empty eyes, and then to my surprise, he nodded. Thank you for the ride, Thomas, he said politely, as if we'd just had a normal conversation. He reached down for his backpack, and I tensed, suddenly afraid he might have a weapon. But he just picked it up and opened the passenger door. The interior light came on, harsh and yellow. In that light, he looked even worse than I'd first thought. His skin had an unhealthy gray cast to it, and there were dark circles under his eyes so pronounced they looked like bruises. But it was his expression that really got to me, completely vacant, like there was nothing behind his eyes at all. You'll think about what I said, he told me, not a question, but a statement. You'll think about it every day for the rest of your life. Then he stepped out onto the highway, closed the door, and just stood there, staring at me through the window. I didn't wait to see where he'd go. I hit the gas so hard the tires squealed, and I didn't slow down until I was a mile away. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. When I finally worked up the courage to check the rearview mirror, the highway behind me was completely empty. No hitchhiker, no figure walking along the shoulder, nothing but empty road stretching back into darkness. I floored it all the way to Westbrook, ran every yellow light through town, and didn't slow down until I pulled into my driveway. I sat there for a long time, engine running, trying to calm down enough to go inside without terrifying my wife. That was 3 months ago. I've driven that stretch of highway dozens of times since then, always in daylight, always with my doors locked. I've never seen him again, but I dream about him. In my dreams, he's sitting in my passenger seat, telling me about dying, his cold fingers reaching for my arm. And sometimes, just sometimes, he shows me exactly what he was talking about. I wake up screaming those nights, my heart racing so fast I'm afraid it will burst. My wife wants me to see someone, talk to a professional. But what would I say? That I picked up a ghost? A demon? A hallucination? I don't even know what he was. All I know is that he was right. I think about what he said every single day, about being trapped in that moment of death forever, about how it feels, about how someday it will be my time. And sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night, I catch movement in my rearview mirror. It's never anything when I look back. But in that first instant, in the corner of my eye, I swear I see him sitting in my back seat, watching me with those empty eyes, waiting. I don't usually share this kind of stuff online, but I need to get this off my chest. What happened to me last Friday in Pine Hollow has been eating away at me, and I haven't slept properly since. I'm writing this partly to see if anyone else has experienced something similar in that area, and partly because I'm hoping putting it into words might help me process it. I was supposed to meet up with some friends at this cabin we rented for the weekend in Pine Hollow. Nothing fancy, just a chance to escape the city, have some beers, and maybe do some hiking. I was running late because of work, so I ended up driving there alone while everyone else had already arrived earlier in the day. The drive started out normal enough. I was in my old Ford F-150, not the most reliable vehicle, but it's gotten me through worse. The GPS took me along this winding road through the mountains that seemed to get narrower with every mile. There wasn't much traffic to begin with, but after I turned onto Hollow Pine Road, I didn't see another car for at least an hour. The sun was already setting, which wasn't part of my plan. The temperature started dropping way faster than I expected for early fall. It must have dropped 20 degrees in like half an hour. I cranked up the heat and kept driving, but the road just kept twisting deeper into these dense woods. The trees were packed so tightly together on both sides that even with my high beams on, I couldn't see more than a few feet into the forest. About 45 minutes in, my truck started acting up. The temperature gauge crept into the red, and steam began seeping out from under the hood. "Shit, not now," I remember saying out loud to myself. I pulled over at the first turnout I could find, barely wide enough for my truck. When I cut the engine, the silence hit me immediately. No cars, no distant voices, not even the usual forest sounds, just nothing. I popped the hood and was greeted by a huge cloud of steam that made me jump back. I waited a few minutes for it to cool down, trying not to think about how isolated I was. My phone showed no service, which didn't surprise me but still added to my uneasiness. While waiting for the engine to cool, I grabbed the flashlight from my glove compartment and the jug of coolant I always keep in the back. That's when I first got that feeling. You know, that crawling sensation up your spine when you feel like you're being watched. I swept my flashlight across the tree line, but the light barely penetrated the darkness between the trunks. The forest seemed to swallow the beam. I convinced myself it was just nerves and focused on the task at hand. Once the engine had cooled enough, I carefully opened the radiator cap and started pouring in coolant. As I was bent over the engine, I heard what sounded like rustling leaves, too deliberate to be wind. I straightened up quickly and shined my light toward the sound. Nothing. But as I turned back to the truck, I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision, something dark shifting between trees. I spun around, heart pounding, but whatever it was had vanished. I told myself it was probably just a deer or something, but deep down, I knew it didn't move like any animal I'd ever seen. I finished with the coolant as quickly as possible, slammed the hood shut and got back in the truck. My hands were shaking as I turned the key. The engine sputtered for a second before catching, and I nearly cried with relief. I pulled back onto the road, driving slower now to avoid overheating again, but desperate to get to the cabin. Every few minutes I'd catch glimpses of something in my rearview mirror, dark shapes moving between the trees, keeping pace with my truck. They were too fast, too fluid to be human, but too upright to be animals. When I'd turned to look directly, there would be nothing there, just the endless wall of pines. I was about 20 miles from the cabin according to my GPS when it happened. The road straightened out for a rare stretch, and my headlights illuminated something standing in the middle of the road about 100 yards ahead. At first, I thought it was a deer frozen in my headlights, but as I got closer, I realized it was a person. A tall figure in what looked like a long, dark coat was just standing there, perfectly still, facing my approaching truck. I slowed down, thinking maybe it was someone who needed help. Another stranded driver, perhaps. But something felt wrong about the way they were standing, so motionless. I hit the brakes hard when I was about 10 feet away. The truck skidded slightly on the cold asphalt before coming to a stop just inches from the figure. Now that I was closer, I could see it was a man, tall and thin, wearing what wasn't exactly a coat, but some kind of long, dark clothing that hung off his frame. He had a hood pulled up, obscuring most of his face. My instinct was to reverse and get the hell out of there, but what if this person genuinely needed help? I'd never forgive myself if I left someone stranded in these woods. So, against my better judgment, I cracked my window, just an inch, and called out, "Hey, you okay? Need help?" The figure took a step toward my truck, then another. His movements were stiff, almost mechanical. When he got to my window, he leaned down slightly and I could see his face under the hood. Jesus Christ. Even writing this now makes my hands shake. His face was so pale it seemed to glow in the darkness, but not in a healthy way, like the pallor of something long dead. His eyes were what got to me, though. They were just wrong, sunken deep into his skull and hollow, like there was nothing behind them. Not vacant like someone spaced out, but empty in a way that made my stomach turn. I can't explain it better than that. They were just holes where life should have been. He reached a hand toward my window, long, thin fingers with nails that looked more like claws. I instinctively leaned away, even though the window was between us. "Please," he said, and his voice, God, his voice. It was barely above a whisper, but somehow seemed to fill my truck. It was raspy like he hadn't spoken in years, but there was something else underneath it. a sort of echo or distortion that didn't sound human. "Help me!" Every alarm bell in my body was screaming. Without thinking, I slammed my foot on the gas pedal. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning on the cold road before catching grip. I didn't look back until I was a good quarter-mile away. When I finally glanced in my rearview mirror, the road behind me was empty. My relief lasted about 2 minutes. As I rounded the next bend, my headlights swept across the road ahead, and there he was again, the same figure, standing in the same position, as if he'd been waiting for me. This was impossible. There was no way he could have gotten ahead of me. I swerved around him this time, not even slowing down. My truck fishtailed slightly, but I managed to keep control. I was going way too fast for these roads now, but fear had taken over any rational thought. The engine temperature was climbing again, but I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. A few miles later, I had to slow down at a particularly sharp turn. As I navigated the bend, I checked my mirrors again and nearly drove off the road. He was there, in my rear view, standing directly behind my truck. Not on the road where I'd just been, but right behind me, as if he'd been riding on my bumper. I floored it again, pushing my poor truck to its limits. The engine was screaming now, the temperature gauge buried in the red, but I didn't care. All that mattered was putting distance between me and whatever the hell that thing was. I don't know how long I drove like that, maybe 15 minutes, maybe an hour. Time seemed to warp. The forest passed in a dark blur. My focus narrowed to the strip of road illuminated by my headlights and the constant checking of my mirrors. Finally, I saw lights in the distance. The small town of Millfield that I knew was about 10 miles from our cabin. I nearly cried with relief as I pulled into the town's single gas station. The engine was making alarming noises, and steam was pouring from under the hood again. But I was around people now. The gas station was open, and there were a couple of cars parked outside. I sat there for a moment, trying to catch my breath and slow my racing heart. That's when I made the mistake of looking back toward the road I'd just come from. There, at the edge of the tree line where the forest met the town, I saw him, just standing there, watching. Even from that distance, I could feel those hollow eyes fixated on me. He didn't move toward the town, didn't step out of the shadows. He just stood there, watching. Then, between one blink and the next, he was gone. I went inside the gas station, probably looking like a complete wreck. The clerk asked if I was okay, and I mumbled something about car trouble. I bought a bottle of water with shaking hands and used the bathroom to splash cold water on my face. When I came out, I half expected to see that figure standing in the store, but there was just the bored clerk and a local browsing the snack aisle. I called my friends from the station's landline to let them know what was happening, minus the creepy part. They offered to come get me, but I couldn't bear the thought of them driving down that road at night. I ended up getting a room at the small motel across from the gas station. I couldn't bring myself to continue driving that night, even though the mechanic who looked at my truck said it would be fine after cooling down and getting more coolant. The next morning, I drove to the cabin in broad daylight. I told my friends some watered-down version about getting lost and having car trouble. We had our weekend, but I couldn't enjoy it. I kept seeing those hollow eyes every time I closed mine. On the drive back home, I took a completely different route, adding 2 hours to my journey just to avoid Hollow Pine Road. I've tried researching the area since then. There are some old forum posts about strange sightings in those woods, but nothing that matches what I experienced. I've thought about reporting it to the local sheriff, but what would I even say? That I saw a creepy guy on the road who moved impossibly fast? The rational part of me wants to believe it was just some homeless person or maybe even a prank. But I know what I saw. I know how it made me feel. And I know that whatever was on that road that night wasn't human, at least not entirely. I'm never driving through Pine Hollow again, especially not at night. If any of you are familiar with the area or have had similar experiences, please let me know. I need to understand what happened to me. For now, I'm sleeping with the lights on, and every time I hear something rustling outside my window, I can't help but picture that pale face and those hollow, lifeless eyes staring back at me. I still can't believe what happened last weekend. It's been 5 days, and I haven't slept right since. My girlfriend Natalie thinks we should just forget about it, but I can't. I keep replaying everything in my head, trying to make sense of it. We live in Willowbrook, this tiny rural community where literally nothing ever happens. One of our things is taking these late-night drives through the country roads. It's peaceful, you know, just us, some music, no other cars. Natalie's family has this old farmhouse about 20 miles outside town, and there are all these back roads that wind through the woods to get there. Last Saturday night was supposed to be like any other. We grabbed some snacks from the gas station around 11:30 p.m. and headed out in my old Ford pickup. It was one of those nights where the moon should have been bright, but the clouds kept covering it. We took our usual route, but decided to try this shortcut I'd heard about from a guy at work, Whispering Pines Road. Stupid name, I know, but it was supposed to cut like 15 minutes off the drive to her family's place. The road wasn't on our GPS, just this narrow dirt path that branches off Route 16. When we turned onto it, Natalie immediately started giving me shit about always finding the creepiest possible roads to drive down. I laughed it off, but I gotta admit, this one was different. The trees grew so thick on both sides that they formed this canopy overhead, blocking out what little moonlight there was. My headlights barely cut through the darkness, illuminating maybe 20 feet ahead at most. About 10 minutes in, the road got narrower, and the woods seemed to press in closer. I remember thinking it was weird how quiet it got. Usually in the woods at night, you hear all kinds of sounds, crickets, frogs, occasional owls. But there was nothing, just the sound of my truck's tires crunching over dirt and gravel. Natalie was scrolling through her phone trying to find a song when I saw him. There was this figure standing right at the edge of the road, just barely in my headlights. A man in what looked like a dark jacket, hood pulled up. He wasn't moving at all, just standing there facing the road. I slowed down, thinking maybe it was someone who needed help. I mean, who the hell would be out here in the middle of nowhere at midnight? "What are you doing?" Natalie asked when she felt the truck slowing down. "There's someone on the road," I said, pointing ahead. She looked up from her phone and immediately tensed up beside me. "Jack, don't stop." But I already had, about 15 feet from the guy. I don't know why, but I rolled my window down. I think back on that now and want to kick myself. What was I thinking? "Hey man, you okay? Need a ride somewhere?" I called out. The figure didn't respond at first. He just stood there, completely still. Then slowly, so damn slowly, he turned his head toward us. I couldn't see his face clearly under the hood, just this dark void where features should be. But I could feel him looking at us. I know how that sounds, but it's true. I felt his eyes on me like a physical weight, and they were empty, cold, not normal. Natalie grabbed my arm so hard her nails dug in. "Jack, drive, now." Something in her voice snapped me out of it. I rolled up the window and hit the gas, spraying dirt and gravel as the truck lurched forward. We passed the figure, and I swear the temperature in the cab dropped by like 20 degrees. I checked my rearview mirror as we drove away, expecting to see him standing there watching us go. He was gone, completely vanished. There was nowhere he could have gone that quickly. The woods were thick with underbrush, and there were no side roads or paths. He had just disappeared. "Did you see where he went?" I asked Natalie, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. She was twisted around in her seat, staring out the back window. "No, he's just gone. Jack, what the fuck was that?" "Probably just some weirdo," I said, trying to sound calm. But my knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and I was pushing my truck faster than I should have on that narrow dirt road. That's when we started noticing the other things. At first, it was just glimpses of movement in the trees alongside us. Quick flashes that I caught in my peripheral vision, like something keeping pace with the truck. I told myself it was just branches swaying, but there wasn't any wind. Natalie saw it too. "Jack," she whispered, staring out her window. "I think there's something following us." I pressed down harder on the gas, pushing the truck to almost 50 mph, way too fast for that road. The engine was whining, and we were bouncing all over the place, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get to the farmhouse. Then we heard it, rustling sounds from the underbrush, moving alongside us. How could anything keep up with a truck going that fast? It wasn't possible, but there it was, this sound of something rushing through the trees, matching our speed. "It's just the wind," I said, even though we both knew there wasn't any. Suddenly, something darted across the road about 30 feet ahead of us, just a dark shape, low to the ground and fast. I swerved hard, nearly sending us into the ditch. Natalie screamed and grabbed the dashboard. "What was that?" she yelled. "I don't know. A deer, maybe." But it wasn't a deer. It was too small, too quick, moved all wrong. We were maybe 5 miles from the farmhouse now. The road straightened out a bit, and I pushed the truck even harder. The engine was screaming, and I could smell something burning, but I didn't ease up. The whole time that rustling kept pace with us, sometimes on my side, sometimes on Natalie's, like whatever it was circling the truck as we moved. Natalie had her phone out, trying to call her brother who was staying at the farmhouse, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. We were in the middle of fucking nowhere. Then the headlights caught something ahead that made my blood freeze. The hooded figure was standing in the middle of the road, maybe 100 yards ahead, facing us directly this time. I swear to God, we'd been driving for at least 5 minutes since seeing him the first time. There's no way he could have gotten ahead of us. "Jack!" Natalie screamed. I didn't slow down. I don't know if I was planning to hit him or if I thought he'd move, but I kept my foot on the gas. As we got closer, maybe 50 yards away, he just dissolved, like smoke being blown away. 1 second he was there, solid as anything, and the next he was gone. I drove right through where he'd been standing, and the truck shuddered violently, like we'd hit a pocket of ice-cold air. The radio, which had been playing quietly this whole time, suddenly blasted static so loud we both jumped. I punched it off. "We're almost there," I kept saying, more to myself than to Natalie. "Almost there, almost there." The rustling beside us had stopped, and for a second I thought maybe we'd outrun whatever it was. Then there was a thump on the roof of the cab. Natalie screamed again, and I nearly drove off the road. It sounded like something had landed on top of the truck, something heavy. The roof dented inward slightly above my head. I started swerving the truck back and forth, trying to shake whatever it was off. There was another thump, and then silence. I didn't trust it, kept driving as fast as I could. When we finally saw the turn-off to the farmhouse driveway, I nearly cried with relief. The driveway is about a quarter-mile long, lined with old oak trees. As we turned onto it, I saw the porch light of the farmhouse in the distance. Natalie was already calling her brother again, and this time it connected. "Kyle, we're coming up the driveway. Something's following us. Open the door and be ready to let us in," she shouted into the phone. We screeched to a halt in front of the house and I killed the engine. Kyle was standing on the porch in his boxers and a t-shirt, looking confused and half asleep. We didn't wait to explain, just bolted from the truck to the house. I distinctly remember the feeling of being watched from the tree line as we ran. Once inside, we locked every door and window. Kyle thought we were losing our minds until we made him look at the roof of my truck, where there were these strange dents. 4 of them in a row, like fingers had pressed into the metal. And they were deep, way deeper than they should have been possible. We spent the rest of the night huddled in the living room with all the lights on, jumping at every sound from outside. The house is old and creaky anyway, but that night it seemed like something was moving around it, testing the walls, looking for a way in. Kyle's dog, this big German shepherd that isn't afraid of anything, spent the whole night whining and hiding under the coffee table. Morning finally came after what felt like the longest night of my life. When the sun rose, I worked up the courage to go outside and check around the house. There was nothing, no footprints, no signs that anything had been there, except for those dents on my truck's roof. We left as soon as possible, taking the main road back to town, even though it added almost half an hour to the drive. Neither of us spoke much on the way back. What was there to say? It's been 5 days now. I've looked up the history of Whispering Pines Road, tried to find any stories about similar experiences, but there's nothing concrete. Just vague mentions of people avoiding that stretch at night, rumors about hikers going missing over the years. I don't know what we saw that night. I don't know if it was human or something else. All I know is I'm never driving down that road again, especially after dark. I keep checking my rearview mirror whenever I'm driving now, half expecting to see that hooded figure standing in the middle of the road behind me. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment at night, I swear I can hear that same rustling sound outside my window. The dents in my truck roof are still there. I've tried to hammer them out, but they won't budge. And sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night, my radio will suddenly cut to static for a few seconds before returning to normal. I don't know what followed us that night. I don't know if it's still following us now. But I can't shake the feeling that whatever it wasn't just some random encounter. It felt like it was waiting for us, like it knew we were coming. And the worst part? I can't stop thinking about how that hooded figure had no visible face under that hood. Just darkness. Empty darkness that somehow still watched us. And those dents on my roof. They're exactly the width of my hand, but 3 times as deep as I could ever press. What kind of strength would it take to do that to metal? I keep telling myself to forget about it, like Natalie wants to, but I can't, because deep down I have this terrible feeling that whatever we encountered that night on Whispering Pines Road isn't done with us yet, that by stopping for it, by acknowledging it, I somehow invited it into our lives. I just needed to tell someone about this. Maybe writing it down will help, or maybe someone else has seen it too and can tell me what the hell is going on. All I know is I'm sleeping with the lights on for the foreseeable future. And if you're ever driving through Willowbrook and someone mentions a shortcut called Whispering Pines Road, just stay on the main highway. No matter how much time it might save you, it's not worth it. Some roads are empty for a reason. I've always been the friend who laughs during horror movies. The one who points out how stupid the main characters are for investigating that strange noise instead of just leaving the house. The one who rolls their eyes at jump scares and picks apart plot holes while everyone else hides behind pillows. Horror never bothered me. I'd seen every classic slasher film, every paranormal thriller, every psychological mindfuck movie out there. None of it ever followed me home, until last September. It started with a storm, one of those late summer monsters that rolls in suddenly and turns day into night. I remember sitting in my living room around 7 p.m., watching the sky turn this sickly greenish black. The weather alert on my phone kept buzzing. Severe thunderstorm warning, possible tornado conditions, flash flood alert. The works. I wasn't worried. Our house in Oakwood Hills had weathered plenty of storms before. It's one of those cookie-cutter suburban neighborhoods where all the houses look similar enough that I still sometimes walk to the wrong driveway when I'm tired. Nothing exciting ever happens here. People move to Oakwood Hills specifically because nothing happens here. My roommate Sam had left that morning for a weekend trip to visit his parents 3 states away. I remember telling him to drive safe, that I'd feed his stupid fish, and that I was looking forward to having the place to myself. Horror movie marathon, I joked as he left. Time to crank the volume up. I'd ordered pizza earlier and was scrolling through Netflix trying to decide what to watch when the first lightning strike hit close enough to make the lights flicker. The delivery guy had just left about 20 minutes before the storm really kicked in. Lucky timing. I settled on some new psychological thriller everyone had been talking about, hit play, and started eating. That's when I first noticed him. At first, it was just movement in my peripheral vision, something through the front window, partly obscured by the sheets of rain hammering against the glass. I paused the movie, annoyed at myself for getting jumpy over what was probably just a neighbor running home through the downpour. But when I looked directly out the window, I saw him standing there, just standing. In our front yard. A figure in a gray hoodie, completely still despite the rain absolutely pouring down. The hood was pulled forward enough that I couldn't see their face clearly. I remember thinking it was weird but not necessarily threatening. Maybe someone's car broke down. Maybe they were disoriented in the storm. So I went back to my movie, but kept glancing out the window. The figure didn't move for at least 5 minutes. Just stood there, facing our house. Another lightning flash illuminated the yard, and suddenly he was closer to the house. I hadn't seen him move, but now he was standing at the edge of our front walkway. My heart started beating faster. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was probably someone looking for help in the storm. But why just stand there? Why not approach the door if you needed assistance? I turned off the TV and all the lights in the living room so I could see outside better without being so visible myself. The rain was coming down in sheets, drumming against the roof so loud it was hard to hear anything else. But even through that noise, I heard it. The doorbell. 1 ring. Clear and normal. My first instinct was to answer it. Storm, stranded person. Basic human decency and all that, but something felt off. I'd been watching this person stand in my yard for 10 minutes before approaching. Normal people don't do that. I stayed silent, peering around the edge of the curtain. Through the decorative window in our front door, I could see the gray hood, no movement to leave, no second ring of the bell, just waiting. After what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute, the figure moved away from the door. I felt a rush of relief that quickly evaporated when I realized they weren't leaving. Instead, they began walking around the perimeter of our house, My stomach dropped. This wasn't someone seeking shelter. This was someone checking out our home. I scrambled to make sure all the doors and windows were locked. Thankfully, we always kept things pretty secure. I grabbed my phone, wondering if I should call the police. But what would I say? There's someone walking around my house during a storm? They'd probably tell me to call back if anything actually happened. Lightning flashed again as I was checking the kitchen window lock, and I nearly screamed. The hooded figure was right outside that window, staring in. We locked eyes for a split second before I ducked down below the counter. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone. I pulled up Sam's contact, then stopped. What could he do from 3 states away except worry? I switched to 911 instead, but kept my finger hovering over the call button, still unsure if I was overreacting. That's when I heard it. The distinct sound of our back door handle jiggling, then pressure against the door, like someone leaning their weight into it, testing its strength. I grabbed the biggest knife from our kitchen block and crouched down behind the island, finally hitting dial on 911. The call connected, but before the operator could even finish saying, 911, what's your emergency? I heard a loud crack from the back door. Someone's breaking into my house, I whispered, giving my address as quickly and quietly as I could. The operator told me police were on their way, to stay on the line, to find somewhere safe to hide. The jiggling stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise had been. I strained to hear any movement, any indication of where the person might be. Nothing but the storm. Then a tapping on the kitchen window. Slow, deliberate taps with what sounded like fingernails on glass. I risked peeking around the edge of the island. The hooded figure was pressed against our kitchen window, hands cupped around his face to see inside better. The hood had fallen back just enough that I could make out his features in the dim light. His face was gaunt, almost skeletal, with deep-set eyes that seemed to reflect no light at all. His skin was so pale it almost appeared gray in the darkness. But the worst part was his expression, completely blank. No anger, no excitement, nothing you'd expect from someone breaking into a house. Just empty. Our eyes met, and I swear my blood turned to ice. His head tilted slightly like he was studying me. Then, without changing his expression at all, he smiled. Not a normal smile. His lips just stretched horizontally across his face, revealing teeth that seemed too small and too numerous. I dropped fully to the floor, back against the island, knife clutched to my chest. I was full-on hyperventilating at this point, trying to whisper my situation to the 911 operator while also listening for any sound of glass breaking. "They've dispatched officers. They should be there in about 6 minutes," the operator said. "Are you somewhere safe? Can you get to a bathroom or bedroom where you can lock the door?" 6 minutes. It might as well have been 6 hours. The tapping stopped. I heard footsteps on our back deck, then nothing. After about 30 seconds of silence, I gathered my courage and peeked out the kitchen window again. He was gone. I frantically checked all the windows I could see from my position. No sign of him. The operator was still asking if I could get to a safer location. I decided to make a run for my bedroom, which had a solid door and a decent lock. Keeping low, knife still in hand, I crept through the dining room toward the hallway. That's when I saw it. A folded piece of paper that had been pushed under the front door. It hadn't been there before. I should have ignored it and kept moving, but curiosity overrode my fear for a split second. I snatched it up as I passed and continued to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. Only then, with my back against the door and the knife still gripped tightly, did I unfold the paper. 3 words in messy, jagged handwriting. Have you forgotten? What the actual fuck? Forgotten what? I didn't know what it meant, but it sent a whole new wave of terror through me. This wasn't random. This person knew me, or thought they knew me. I stayed in my bedroom until the police arrived about 5 minutes later. I heard them calling out as they entered the house, and I shouted back, letting them know where I was. 2 officers swept the house and found no one. No signs of forced entry, though there were definite scratch marks around our back door lock. They took my statement, looked at the note, asked if I had any enemies or angry exes. I didn't. They checked outside but found no footprints. The rain had washed everything away. They were sympathetic but not particularly alarmed. Probably some druggie looking for an empty house to rob, they suggested. When I described the man's strange appearance, one officer exchanged a look with the other that I couldn't interpret. They offered to do extra patrols around the neighborhood that night, but basically told me there wasn't much else they could do. One suggested I call someone to stay with me or go somewhere else for the night. But all my close friends live at least an hour away, and the storm was still raging. I was stuck. After they left, I double-checked every lock, pushed furniture in front of both exterior doors, and set up a makeshift alarm system of pots and pans that would crash if anyone tried to enter. I took the knife back to bed with me and tried to distract myself with mindless videos on my phone. I must have eventually fallen asleep from pure exhaustion, because I woke up to sunlight streaming through my window. The storm had passed. In the bright morning light, last night's terror seemed distant and almost silly. Almost. I spent the day jumpy and on edge, startling at every noise. I kept the TV on just for background sound, filling the empty house with voices. Around 3 p.m., my phone rang with an unknown number. Usually I'd ignore it, but I was expecting a call back from my parents after I'd left them a vague message about having a weird night. "Hello?" I answered. Silence, then breathing. "Hello? Who is this?" I demanded, my stomach already knotting. A voice, low and raspy, almost like it was coming from very far away. "Have you forgotten?" I hung up immediately, my hands shaking so badly I dropped the phone. I tried to tell myself it was just a weird coincidence, a prank call that happened to use the same phrase. But I knew better. I called the police again and reported the call. They took the information but didn't seem particularly concerned. "Creepy, yes, but not actually threatening," they pointed out. Sam wouldn't be back until the next evening. I considered calling him, asking him to come home early, but what would I say? Some creepy guy stood in our yard during a storm, and now I'm getting weird phone calls. I felt stupid even thinking about it. That night, I made sure everything was locked up tight again, rechecked all my makeshift alarms, and tried to settle in for another night alone. I kept all the lights on and the TV volume low enough that I could hear any unusual sounds. Around midnight, I finally started to relax enough to consider sleeping. I was exhausted from the constant vigilance. I decided to make one final check of all the doors and windows before heading to bed. As I walked down the hallway toward the living room, I noticed something odd about the quality of light. It seemed dimmer than it should have been. When I turned the corner, I realized why. Most of the lamps I'd left on were now off. Only one small table lamp still glowed in the corner. I froze. I hadn't turned those lights off. I know I hadn't. That's when I felt it. A subtle shift in the air behind me. The prickling sensation of being watched. The soft sound of breathing that wasn't my own. I turned slowly, already knowing what I would see. He stood in the hallway behind me, still wearing that gray hoodie. Though the hood was down now, His face was even more disturbing in the dim light, skin stretched too tight over sharp cheekbones, eyes sunken and dark, lips thin and colorless. He looked almost malnourished, but in an unnatural way, like something was consuming him from the inside. "How did you get in?" I whispered, my voice barely functioning. He tilted his head again, that same curious gesture from the night before. When he spoke, his voice matched the one from the phone, raspy, distant, hollow. "Have you forgotten?" I should have run. I should have screamed. I should have done anything other than what I did, which was stand there paralyzed as he took a step toward me. "Who are you? What do you want?" I managed to ask, backing away slowly. "You know me," he said, still advancing. "You've always known me." I shook my head. "I don't. I've never seen you before." That horrible smile stretched across his face again. Liar. My back hit the wall. I had nowhere else to go. He was only a few feet away now, close enough that I could smell him. A strange, musty odor, like old books left in a damp basement. "Please," I whispered, not even sure what I was begging for. He reached out one pale, long-fingered hand, and I flinched away. But instead of touching me, he placed something on the side table next to me, a small, folded piece of paper. "You will remember," he said. Then the lights flickered, just once, barely a second of darkness. But when they stabilized, he was gone, completely vanished. No sound of footsteps, no opening door, no evidence he'd ever been there except the paper on the table and the lingering smell of decay. I lunged for my phone, called 911 for the third time in 2 days, and locked myself in the bathroom until the police arrived. They searched the entire house, the yard, the neighborhood. Nothing. No signs of forced entry, no evidence anyone had been there at all. When I showed them the note, identical to the first one, except for the new message, they exchanged those looks again. I could tell they were starting to think I was making this up or having some kind of breakdown. They took the note as evidence, but didn't seem hopeful it would lead anywhere. One officer gently suggested I might want to talk to someone about the stress I was under. I wanted to scream at them that I wasn't crazy, that this was real, but I could hear how it all sounded. Sam came home the next day, and I told him everything. He believed me more than the police did, but I could tell he was skeptical about some parts, especially the man disappearing instantly. He suggested it might have been a neighbor or someone I'd met briefly and forgotten. Maybe someone with mental health issues who'd fixated on me. We installed a security system the next week. Nothing ever happened again. No more hooded figures, no more notes, no more strange phone calls. Eventually, life went back to normal, or as normal as it could be. That was 8 months ago. I still check the locks 3 times before bed. I still sleep with a baseball bat beside me. I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, certain there's someone standing in my doorway watching me. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the house, I swear I hear that voice again, asking me if I've forgotten. The problem is, I still don't know what I'm supposed to remember, and that terrifies me more than anything else, because what if whatever I've forgotten is still out there, waiting for me to remember? I'm still trying to make sense of what happened 3 weeks ago. I've been debating whether to post this, but I need to tell someone because it's eating me up inside, and my wife thinks I'm losing my mind. It was a Thursday evening in mid-August. The weather forecast had been calling for a severe thunderstorm all day, and Arthur, my 6-year-old, was beyond excited. Most kids his age are terrified of storms, but not Arthur. Ever since he was about 4, We've had this little tradition where we sit in our backyard gazebo and watch the lightning together. Just the two of us. I know it sounds weird, but these storm-watching sessions have become our special thing. My wife Jenny thinks we're both nuts and stays inside with her noise-canceling headphones. But Arthur and I love it. The rumbling thunder, the spectacular lightning shows, the smell of rain-soaked earth. I'd set up this wooden gazebo a couple years ago specifically for this purpose. It's nothing fancy, just a simple structure with a solid roof and open sides, but it gives us the perfect shelter to experience the storms without getting drenched. That Thursday was supposed to be just another storm-watching night. I remember checking the radar on my phone around 6 p.m., seeing this massive system headed our way. Arthur was practically bouncing off the walls with excitement during dinner. "Dad, the Weather Channel said it's going to be a big one," he kept saying between bites of mac and cheese. "Can we make hot chocolate for the gazebo?" So as the sky darkened, we got ready, filled a thermos with hot chocolate, grabbed some cookies, and I even brought out this old emergency radio I keep around for power outages. Jenny gave us her usual eye roll, but helped Arthur into his rain boots anyway. We live in Willow Creek, one of those cookie-cutter suburban neighborhoods where all the houses kind of look the same. Our property backs up to a small wooded area that separates our development from the next one over. Nothing dense or scary, just a stretch of trees maybe 100 yards deep. During the day, you can actually see through to the houses on the other side. By 7:30, the storm was really picking up. The wind had that special feel to it, that electric heaviness that comes before a serious thunderstorm. Arthur and I were settled in the gazebo with our hot chocolate, and I had the radio tuned to some station playing old rock music. The first few lightning strikes lit up the sky, and Arthur would count the seconds until the thunder followed. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3, boom. "Dad, that was only 3 miles away." I remember checking my phone, seeing all these weather alerts popping up, flash flood warnings, severe thunderstorm warnings, the works. But we were safe in our gazebo, and I wasn't worried. The storm intensified around 8 p.m. The rain was coming down in sheets, and the lightning was almost constant. The wind was whipping through the trees at the edge of our property, bending them at angles I'd never seen before. Arthur was loving every minute of it, his eyes wide with excitement. That's when it happened. During one particularly bright flash of lightning, Arthur suddenly grabbed my arm. His little fingers dug into my skin with surprising strength. "Dad," he whispered, still staring straight ahead, "there's somebody standing by the trees." I followed his gaze toward the edge of the woods. At first I didn't see anything, just darkness between lightning flashes. Then the sky lit up again, and I saw it too. There was definitely a figure standing right at the tree line, completely motionless, just watching us. My first thought was that it was a neighbor, maybe someone caught in the storm looking for shelter. But something felt off immediately. This person wasn't moving, wasn't trying to get out of the rain. They were just standing there, partially obscured by the lowest branches of an oak tree. "Stay here," I told Arthur, trying to keep my voice casual. "I'm going to see if someone needs help." Arthur's hand tightened on my arm. "No, Dad, don't go." I gently removed his hand. "It's okay, buddy. It's probably just Mr. Peterson from down the street. Remember how he walks his dog even in bad weather?" But I knew it wasn't Mr. Peterson. The figure was too still, too deliberate in its positioning. I grabbed the flashlight we'd brought out and stepped from the gazebo into the rain. Immediately I was drenched. The rain was coming down so hard it was difficult to see more than 10 feet ahead. I pointed the flashlight toward the tree line and started walking, calling out, "Hello, do you need help?" No response. The figure didn't move. I got maybe halfway across my backyard when another flash of lightning illuminated everything. The figure was still there, and now I could make out more details. It appeared to be wearing some kind of dark hooded coat or poncho. I couldn't see a face inside the hood, just darkness. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time to be heard over the storm. The figure finally moved. It took one step backward, into the trees, never turning away from me. Something about that movement made my skin crawl. It wasn't startled or embarrassed like someone caught trespassing would be. It was deliberate, almost like it wanted me to follow. Another lightning flash, and the figure was gone. Just disappeared into the darkness of the woods. I stood there in the pouring rain for a moment, my clothes completely soaked through, trying to process what I'd just seen. Part of me wanted to go after the person, to find out who was lurking at the edge of my property during a thunderstorm. But a stronger instinct told me to get back to Arthur. When I returned to the gazebo, Arthur was huddled on the bench, knees pulled up to his chest. "Did you see who it was, Dad?" he asked, his voice small. "Just someone walking by," I lied, forcing a smile. "They're gone now, probably hurrying home to get out of this crazy rain." Arthur didn't look convinced. "They were watching us. I saw them before, too." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with my wet clothes. Before? When? Last week, when we were watching the small storm. They were standing in the same spot. I had no memory of seeing anyone during our storm watching session the previous week. But kids notice things adults don't, right? Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. A neighbor using the storm as cover to walk their dog through the woods. A teenager from the neighborhood behind us taking a shortcut. But if that was the case, why just stand there? Why not wave or call out or simply walk on by? We tried to continue our storm watching, but the mood was broken. Arthur kept looking nervously toward the trees, and honestly, so did I. Around 9 p.m., I suggested we head inside, claiming it was getting late. Arthur didn't protest, which was unusual. Normally, he'd beg for just 5 more minutes of storm watching. Inside, Jenny took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. After we got Arthur into his pajamas and settled in front of a cartoon, I pulled her aside and told her what had happened. "It was probably just someone from the neighborhood behind us," she said, echoing my earlier thoughts. "Taking a shortcut through the woods." "In the middle of a severe thunderstorm? And why just stand there staring at us?" She shrugged. "People are weird, Tim. Maybe they were waiting for the rain to let up a bit before continuing." I wanted to believe that explanation, but something about the figure's stillness, the deliberate way it had backed into the trees without turning around, it just felt wrong. We put Arthur to bed around 9:30. His room is on the 2nd floor, with windows that face the backyard and those woods. As I was tucking him in, he asked me to close his curtains. "I don't want them to see me," he whispered. I felt that chill again, but tried to laugh it off. "There's nobody out there, buddy, and even if there was, they couldn't see you all the way up here in the dark." But I closed the curtains anyway, making a show of checking that they were completely shut. I left his door cracked open and his nightlight on, as usual. Jenny and I watched TV downstairs for a couple of hours. The storm was still raging outside, one of the longest thunderstorms I could remember in years. Around 11:30 we headed up to bed. I was exhausted, but found myself lying awake, listening to the rain hammering against the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. I must have dozed off eventually, because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by a sound. Not thunder, something else. It took me a moment to realize it was Arthur's voice. "Dad! Dad!" I was out of bed instantly, heart pounding. Jenny stirred beside me, mumbling something, but I was already moving toward Arthur's room. The digital clock on our nightstand read 2:17 a.m. Arthur was sitting up in bed, pointing toward his window. The curtains were still closed, but he was staring at them with absolute terror. "They're outside my window," he whispered when he saw me. "Arthur, honey, you were having a bad dream," I said, sitting on the edge of his bed. "There's nobody out there. We're 2 stories up." But even as I said it, I felt a growing certainty that he wasn't just having a nightmare. Call it paternal instinct or just paranoia after what had happened earlier, but something told me to check. "Stay in bed," I told him. "I'll look, okay?" I approached the window cautiously. The storm had weakened but was still going, rain pattering against the glass. I reached for the curtain, then hesitated. What if there actually was someone out there? What would they be standing on? Our house doesn't have any ledges or easy climbing access to the second-floor windows. Taking a deep breath, I pulled the curtain aside just enough to peek out. The backyard was dark, but a flash of lightning illuminated everything for a split second, and in that instant, I saw it. The same hooded figure, standing directly below Arthur's window, looking up, looking right at me. I jerked back from the curtain, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. This couldn't be happening. It made no sense. "Is somebody there?" Arthur asked, his voice trembling. "Nobody. No one's there," I lied again. "But I'm going to go check around outside anyway, just to make sure we're all safe, okay?" I went back to our bedroom, where Jenny was now half awake. "What's going on?" she mumbled. "Nothing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I pulled on a pair of sweatpants. "Arthur had a bad dream. I'm just going to check around outside to show him everything's fine." She squinted at me. "In the middle of a thunderstorm?" "It's mostly past. Just a little rain now." Before she could protest further, I was heading downstairs. I grabbed a baseball bat from the hall closet and my phone for the flashlight. My hands were shaking as I disabled the alarm system and unlocked the back door. The rain had indeed lightened to a steady drizzle, and the thunder was now just a distant rumble. I stepped onto our back porch, flipped on my phone's flashlight, and swept the beam across the yard toward Arthur's window. Nothing. No one standing there. I moved down the porch steps, the wet grass soaking my bare feet as I slowly approached the spot where I thought I'd seen the figure. The ground beneath Arthur's window was undisturbed. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been standing there just moments ago. I expanded my search, moving along the perimeter of the house, bat raised and ready. Nothing at the side of the house, nothing by the front yard. I returned to the backyard and shined my light toward the woods. The tree line was about 50 yards from our property, a dark wall of vegetation now dripping with rainwater. For a long moment, I stood there, scanning back and forth with my flashlight, looking for any sign of movement. And then I saw it. Just for an instant, a flash of something pale moving between the trees, deeper in the woods. Not at the edge where I'd seen the figure before, but well inside the tree line. It was so quick I might have imagined it. I should have gone back inside. Every horror movie I've ever seen flashed through my mind, warning me not to investigate strange movements in dark woods at 2 a.m. But this was real life, my family, and I needed to know what was going on. I started toward the woods, each step feeling heavier than the last. The wet grass gave way to muddy earth as I approached the tree line. My phone's flashlight seemed pathetically inadequate against the dense darkness between the trees. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound authoritative rather than terrified. This is private property. I've called the police." I hadn't called anyone, but the bluff seemed worth a try. No response, just the steady drip of rainwater from leaves and branches. I took a few more steps, now standing at the very edge of the woods. The trees loomed over me, creating deep shadows that my flashlight couldn't fully penetrate. I swept the beam back and forth, squinting to see anything unusual. That's when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic sound coming from somewhere deeper in the woods. At first, I thought it was just water dripping from the trees, but as I listened more carefully, I realized it was too regular, too deliberate. Footsteps. Someone walking slowly through the wet undergrowth. "I know you're there," I called out, gripping the bat tighter. "Show yourself." The footsteps stopped. Then, from much closer than I expected, came a sound that turned my blood to ice. A soft, whispering voice, barely audible. "Arthur." Just my son's name, nothing else. But the way it was said, like a caress, like whoever was speaking knew him intimately, made me want to vomit. "Get the fuck away from my family," I shouted, panic and rage overriding my fear. I charged forward into the woods, swinging the bat wildly, no longer caring about my own safety. I crashed through underbrush, slipping on wet leaves, my flashlight beam bouncing crazily as I ran. I was maybe 20 yards into the woods when my foot caught on something, a root or fallen branch, and I went down hard, face first into the mud. The impact knocked the wind out of me and sent my phone flying from my hand. For a moment, I just lay there, gasping for breath in the pitch darkness. Then I frantically felt around for my phone, finally locating it a few feet away. The flashlight was still on, illuminating a patch of wet leaves. I scrambled to my feet, pointing the light in all directions. Nothing, no sign of anyone. "Where are you?" I screamed, my voice breaking. Only silence answered me. I don't know how long I stood there, breathing hard, mud-covered and soaked to the skin. Eventually, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a bone-deep dread and the growing certainty that I was making a terrible mistake being out here alone. I backed out of the woods, keeping my flashlight trained ahead of me the whole time, half expecting the hooded figure to lunge at me from the darkness. But nothing happened. I made it back to my yard, then my house, without incident. Jenny was waiting for me in the kitchen, fully awake now and looking worried. "What the hell, Tim? You're covered in mud. What were you doing out there?" I opened my mouth to tell her everything. About the figure I'd seen twice now, about the voice in the woods saying our son's name. But suddenly it all seemed insane. What evidence did I have? What would I tell the police if we called them? That I saw someone standing in the rain, and then maybe saw them again, and then heard a voice in the woods? "I thought I saw someone in the backyard," I said instead. But it was nothing, probably just shadows from the storm playing tricks on me. She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes, but she didn't push it. She just handed me a towel and said, "You need to get some sleep. You're not thinking clearly." I checked on Arthur before going back to bed. He was asleep, his breathing deep and regular. I made sure his window was locked and the curtains were tightly closed before returning to our bedroom. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I just lay there, listening to every creak of the house, every tap of rain against the windows, wondering if whoever or whatever had been out there might come back. The next morning, I called the police anyway. They sent an officer out who walked around our property and along the edge of the woods. He found nothing, no footprints, no evidence that anyone had been there. He was polite, but clearly thought I was overreacting to what was probably just a neighbor taking a shortcut, or someone briefly seeking shelter from the storm. That was 3 weeks ago. The weather has been clear since then. No more storms for Arthur and me to watch from the gazebo. In fact, I haven't let Arthur play in the backyard at all since that night, making up excuses about lawn treatments and mosquito concerns. Jenny thinks I'm being paranoid, that I had some kind of stress-induced episode. Maybe she's right. Maybe it was just someone passing through, and my imagination turned it into something sinister. But I can't shake the memory of that voice whispering my son's name. And sometimes, when I look out at those woods, especially as dusk falls, I swear I can see something moving between the trees, watching, waiting for the next storm. I've never told anyone the full story of what happened to me in Greywood. I'm still trying to make sense of it, but I need to put this into words before it consumes me completely. 3 months ago, I moved to Greywood for a fresh start. It's one of those tiny dots on the map that most GPS systems struggle to find. Population 837, according to the weathered welcome sign. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and outsiders stick out like a neon sign in the dark. I'd just gotten out of a messy relationship and wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere I could breathe without memories haunting every street corner. The rental market in Greywood consisted of exactly 3 options: a studio apartment above the town's only diner, a rundown trailer on the outskirts, or a surprisingly affordable 2-story house on Elmwood Lane. I chose the house. It seemed like too good a deal to pass up. $750 a month for a whole house with a yard. The listing photos looked charming, despite the obvious need for some TLC. My landlord, Mr. Harrison, was a jittery man in his 60s who seemed weirdly eager to get the rental agreement signed. He mentioned the place had been vacant for a little while, but skimmed over exactly how long when I asked. The way his eyes never quite met mine should have been my first warning. "House has some quirks," he'd said, while handing me the keys. "Old pipes make noise, floors creak, nothing to worry about." Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "Basement stays locked. Nothing down there but old furnace equipment. No need to go poking around." I nodded, half listening, focused more on the weight of the keys in my hand and the promise of a new beginning they represented. The house itself was exactly what I expected, charming in that worn-out way, with faded floral wallpaper in the kitchen, scratched hardwood floors, and windows that let in cold air even when fully closed. But it was mine, at least temporarily, and that first night I fell asleep on my mattress on the floor, feeling cautiously optimistic. It didn't last. The first week was uneventful enough that I started to relax. I unpacked my meager belongings, bought some second-hand furniture from the thrift store in the next town over, and started looking for work. The locals were nice enough, if a bit reserved. Nobody asked why I'd moved to Greywood, which suited me just fine. Everything changed 9 days after I moved in. It was a Thursday night, and a summer storm had rolled in with surprising ferocity. The house groaned and shuddered with each gust of wind, rain lashing against the windows like someone was throwing handfuls of pebbles. I'd never been a fan of storms, but I'd made myself comfortable on the couch with a blanket, a book, and a glass of cheap wine, determined to ride it out. The power flickered once, twice, then died completely around 9 p.m. I cursed, fumbling for my phone to use as a flashlight. The battery was at 27%, not great. I found some candles in the kitchen drawer and lit a few, placing them around the living room. The dancing shadows they cast on the walls made me uneasy, but I told myself I was being childish. That's when I heard it for the first time. Thump, thump, thump. a steady, rhythmic sound coming from below the floorboards. At first I thought it might be something outside, a shutter banging in the wind or a branch hitting the side of the house. But it was too regular, too deliberate. Thump, thump, thump. I muted the podcast I'd been half listening to and held my breath, straining to hear through the howling wind and pelting rain. There it was again, unmistakable this time. Thump, thump, thump. Definitely coming from the basement. My mind immediately ran through the rational explanations. Probably the water heater acting up, or maybe the storm had somehow affected the pipes in a way that was causing that noise. But I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that it sounded almost intentional, like someone knocking, asking to be let in. I grabbed my phone and the largest kitchen knife I owned and made my way to the basement door in the hallway. It was locked, just as Mr. Harrison had said it would be. The key he'd given me was on my key ring, and my hands shook as I fitted it into the lock. The thumping continued, steady as a heartbeat, as I pushed the door open. The smell hit me first. Damp earth and something else. Something sickly sweet that reminded me of flowers left too long in a vase. The wooden stairs creaked ominously under my weight as I descended, holding my phone out in front of me, its weak light barely cutting through the darkness. The basement was mostly empty. Concrete floors, stone foundation walls, exposed pipes along the ceiling. Nothing out of the ordinary except for a small door on the far wall. It wasn't much bigger than a crawl space entrance, maybe 3 feet tall at most, and secured with a rusted padlock that looked ancient. The thumping was coming from behind it. Thump, thump, thump. I stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, knife clutched in my sweaty hand, as the reality of the situation sank in. Someone, or something, was on the other side of that door, in my house, making that noise. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. My voice sounded pathetically small in the cavernous basement. "Is someone there?" The thumping stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow worse, heavy with expectation. I strained to hear any sound at all, but there was nothing. Even the storm seemed to have momentarily quieted. Then, just as my nerves were stretched to breaking point, I heard it. A soft scratching sound, like fingernails dragging slowly across the other side of the door. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I took the stairs 2 at a time, slammed the basement door shut behind me, and locked it with trembling hands. I spent the rest of the night huddled on the couch, knife beside me. Lights turned on when the power eventually came back around 3 a.m. I didn't sleep a wink. Morning brought sunshine, chirping birds, and the particular brand of self-loathing that comes with letting your imagination run wild in the dark. I convinced myself I'd overreacted. Old houses make noise, especially during storms. The basement was probably full of mice, or maybe even a raccoon had somehow gotten in. The scratching sound? Just my overtired brain interpreting random noises. I called Mr. Harrison that morning, trying to keep my voice casual as I asked about the small door in the basement. "Oh, that?" he said, a little too quickly. "Just an old coal chute. Been sealed up for decades. Nothing to worry about." "It's locked," I pointed out. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Is it?" Must have been the previous owner. Like I said, nothing to worry about. "I'd appreciate if you'd leave it alone. Insurance reasons, you understand." I didn't understand, but I let it drop. That day, I went about my business, applying for jobs online and making a grocery run. By afternoon, I'd almost convinced myself that the whole thing had been a stress-induced hallucination. Almost. The question kept nagging at me. Why lock an empty coal chute? And why did it sound like something was inside? I lasted until about 4 p.m. before curiosity overwhelmed my better judgment. I found a crowbar in the small shed behind the house, took a deep breath, and headed back down to the basement. In the daylight filtering through the small ground-level windows, it looked less ominous, just a dingy, cobwebbed space that needed a good cleaning. The door with the padlock, though, still made my skin crawl. I wedged the crowbar into the hasp of the padlock and pulled with all my strength. It took 3 attempts before the old metal finally gave way with a screech that set my teeth on edge. The padlock fell to the concrete floor with a heavy clunk. I hesitated, listening intently. No thumping, no scratching, just the normal sounds of the house settling around me. The small door had no handle, just a recessed edge I could grip with my fingers. I pulled it open slowly, wincing at the creak of unused hinges. Beyond it was not the sealed passage I expected, but a narrow tunnel, just wide enough for an adult to crawl through. It stretched about 15 feet, ending at what appeared to be another room. Common sense told me to close the door, put the broken padlock back as best I could, and pretend I'd never seen this. But that same curiosity that had brought me this far pushed me forward. I turned on my phone's flashlight again, and after a moment's hesitation, began to crawl through the tunnel. The air grew colder and damper as I moved forward, and that sickly sweet smell grew stronger. The tunnel opened into a small room, maybe 8 feet square, with a dirt floor and stone walls. It was empty except for a single wooden chair in the center, facing away from me, and someone was sitting in it. I froze, the beam of my flashlight illuminating dust particles floating in the stale air. Whoever it was didn't move or acknowledge my presence. All I could see was the back of a small head with long, matted dark hair. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. Slowly, terribly, the head began to turn. I wanted to run, to scramble backward through the tunnel and never look back, but I was paralyzed with fear. The figure turned fully, and I found myself staring at what appeared to be a young girl, maybe 8 years old. Her face was gaunt, with hollow cheeks and dark circles under her eyes. She wore what might have once been a white nightgown, now gray with dirt and age. But it was her eyes that held me, dark, empty pools that seemed to swallow the light from my phone. They were fixed directly on mine, unblinking and ancient in that small face. "Why did you leave me?" she whispered, her voice like dry leaves rustling. I dropped my phone. The light spun crazily as it clattered to the dirt floor, briefly illuminating the girl's bare, filthy feet before going out completely. In the sudden darkness, I heard a soft shuffling sound, as if she was standing up from the chair. I scrambled backward through the tunnel on my hands and knees, scraping my palms and knees raw in my desperation to get away. I didn't stop until I was out of the basement entirely. The door locked behind me. I grabbed my car keys and wallet and fled the house, not stopping until I was sitting in my car at the town's only gas station, hands still shaking too badly to put the key in the ignition. I spent the night in my car, parked in the lot of the 24-hour grocery store in the next town over. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was probably just some neighborhood kid playing a sick prank. Maybe they'd found another way into the basement and were trying to scare the new tenant. The rational explanations piled up, but none of them explained the bone-deep terror I'd felt in that room or the girl's hollow eyes. The next morning, exhausted and stiff from sleeping in my car, I convinced myself to go back. I needed clothes, my laptop, my few valuable possessions. I'd grab what I could and find somewhere else to stay while I figured out how to break my lease. The house looked perfectly normal in the morning light. Birds sang in the trees, and a neighbor across the street waved cheerfully as she collected her mail. I waved back mechanically, feeling like I was moving through a dream. Inside, everything was as I'd left it. The basement door still locked, my wine glass still on the coffee table, my book open and face down on the couch. I quickly gathered essentials into a duffel bag, avoiding looking at the basement door. I was almost to the front door when I heard it again. Thump, thump, thump. My hand froze on the doorknob. The sound was unmistakable, coming from directly beneath my feet. How could she be thumping if I'd left the inner door open, unless she'd moved? Thump, thump, thump. Louder now, more insistent. I turned the knob, ready to flee, when a cold draft brushed the back of my neck. The hair on my arm stood on end as I slowly turned around. She was standing at the top of the basement stairs. Impossible. I'd locked that door. But there she was, small and filthy and terribly real. Up close, her skin had a grayish cast to it, and her hair hung in tangled clumps around her face. "Why did you leave me?" she asked again, taking a step toward me. Her movements were wrong somehow, jerky and too fluid at the same time, like her joints didn't work quite right. I dropped my bag and yanked open the front door, stumbling down the porch steps in my panic. I didn't look back until I was in my car, engine already running. Through the windshield, I could see her standing in the doorway, a small, dark silhouette watching me go. I drove straight to Mr. Harrison's house, a tidy bungalow on the other side of town. He opened the door on my third knock, looking unsurprised to see me. "There's someone in the house," I blurted out before he could speak. "A little girl, in the basement, behind that locked door." His face drained of color. "You opened it?" he whispered. "After I specifically told you." "Who is she?" I demanded. "What the hell is going on?" He sagged against the doorframe, suddenly looking every one of his 60-something years. "Come in," he said finally. "You should sit down for this." Inside, over a cup of coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink, he told me the story. The house had belonged to the Whitaker family in the 1970s, parents and their young daughter, Eliza. One winter, the parents left for a weekend trip, leaving Eliza with a babysitter. A blizzard hit, stranding the parents in the next county. When they finally made it back 3 days later, they found the babysitter dead from an apparent heart attack. There was no sign of Eliza. The police searched everywhere, but the little girl had vanished. The prevailing theory was that she'd wandered out into the storm looking for help after the babysitter died and succumbed to the elements. Her body was never found. "The previous tenants complained about noises," Mr. Harrison said, staring into his own coffee cup. "Thumping, things moving around, a child crying. Most didn't last more than a few months." "Why didn't you tell me this?" I demanded, anger momentarily overcoming my fear. He shrugged helplessly. "Would you have rented it if I had?" I left his house with no intention of ever returning to mine. I checked into a motel in the neighboring town and called a friend to ask if I could crash on her couch until I figured out my next move. That night, I slept fitfully, waking at every sound, expecting to see a small figure standing at the foot of the bed. The next morning, I drove back to Graywood one last time. I needed my birth certificate and some other documents I'd left behind in my panicked flight. I'd be in and out in 5 minutes, I promised myself. The house was silent as I entered. No thumping, no presence, just an empty, somewhat shabby rental. I hurried to the bedroom and retrieved my document folder from the closet shelf. As I turned to leave, I noticed something on my bed that hadn't been there before, a small indentation, as if someone very light had been sitting on the edge. Beside it was a single long dark hair. I ran. I got in my car and drove away from Greywood, pushing the speed limit the entire way. I didn't stop until I reached my friend's apartment 3 hours later. I told her I'd had a falling out with my landlord and needed a place to stay. I didn't mention the girl. Who would believe me? I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The thumping followed me. At first it was just in my dreams, that steady rhythmic sound pulling me down into nightmares where I wandered endless tunnels searching for something I could never find. Then I started hearing it while awake, in the walls of my friend's apartment, under the floor at the coffee shop where I found a job, beneath my feet as I walked down the street. Thump, thump, thump. Always 3 beats, always the same rhythm, always below me, no matter where I went. 2 nights ago, I woke to find my bedroom window open, a cold breeze billowing the curtains. I distinctly remembered closing and locking it before bed. As I got up to close it, I saw something on the windowsill, a small, muddy handprint. Last night I dreamed of the girl again, but this time she wasn't in the basement. She was beside my bed, her hollow eyes level with mine, her cold fingers brushing my cheek. "Why did you leave me?" she whispered, her breath smelling of damp earth. "Everyone always leaves me." I woke up gasping, my cheek still cold from her touch. I don't know what to do. I can't go back to that house, but I can't seem to escape her either. She's attached herself to me somehow, and I don't know how to make her let go. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between sleep and wakefulness, I wonder if she ever really was a ghost at all. Maybe she's something older, something that was there long before Eliza Whittaker disappeared, something that wears the face of a lost child because that's what we fear and pity most. Or maybe she really is just a little girl, abandoned and afraid, asking the question that has haunted her for decades. Why did you leave me? I don't have answers. All I know is that it's getting dark now, and I can hear it starting again beneath the floorboards. Thump, thump, thump. I've never been someone who believes in ghosts. Not really. I mean, I'll watch horror movies with friends and get spooked like anyone else, but I've always considered myself pretty grounded. Science-minded, rational. That changed last month, and I still haven't fully processed what happened. I'm writing this down partly to make sense of it myself, but also because I need to know if anyone else has experienced something similar. For context, I make a monthly drive to visit my parents who live about 2 hours away in rural Blackwater County. They moved there after retiring because property was cheap, and my dad always wanted land to tinker with his woodworking projects. The drive is usually peaceful, mostly back roads through farmland and woods. I typically stay the weekend and head back Sunday afternoons. Last month's visit was normal. We grilled, watched some baseball, and I helped Dad fix the deck railing. Nothing unusual. The weather forecast showed storms moving in Sunday evening, so I decided to leave a bit earlier than usual. My mistake was underestimating how quickly the weather would deteriorate. I was about 45 minutes into my drive home when the sky darkened dramatically. Within minutes, rain was coming down in sheets. I'm talking biblical downpour, the kind where your wipers can't keep up even at full speed. I slowed to maybe 30 mph, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles, trying to make out the road ahead. The rural roads in Blackwater County aren't great to begin with. Narrow, winding, and mostly unmarked. Add torrential rain and near darkness at 4:30 in the afternoon, and the drive becomes genuinely stressful. No streetlights out there, just dense woods on both sides. My headlights barely cut through the curtain of rain, creating this tunnel-like effect where I could only see maybe 20 feet ahead. I was on Route 16, a particularly isolated stretch with no houses for miles, when it happened. A flash of lightning illuminated everything for a split second, and there he was. A man standing dead center in my lane, maybe 30 feet ahead. My heart nearly stopped. I slammed on the brakes and swerved, feeling my tires lose traction on the wet asphalt. The car fishtailed, but I somehow managed to regain control without going into the ditch. When I looked back through my rearview mirror, breathing hard and shaking, there was nothing there. No man, nothing. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, trying to process what I'd seen. It had been so brief, just that single flash of lightning, but the image was burned into my mind. A tall, painfully thin man wearing what looked like all white clothing. Not modern clothes, but something old-fashioned. And he'd been completely still, facing my oncoming car, making no attempt to move. My first thought was that my eyes had played tricks on me. Maybe it was just a tree branch or something caught in the lightning flash. But I knew what I saw. It was a man. His face had been pale, almost glowing against the dark backdrop of trees. I took a few deep breaths and continued driving, now going even slower. My hands were trembling on the wheel. I kept thinking about how strange it was. Who would be standing in the middle of a remote road during a severe thunderstorm, wearing white, of all things? The rain intensified, if that was even possible. Water was streaming across the road in places, and I seriously considered pulling over to wait it out. The problem was, there was nowhere safe to stop. No shoulder on these narrow country roads, just drainage ditches and then dense forest. About 3 miles further, I approached a sharp bend in the road. As I slowed to navigate it, another lightning flash lit up the sky. This time the man in white was at the edge of the road, just at the tree line. But what happened next makes me question my sanity, even as I write this. In the brief darkness between lightning flashes, I sensed movement to my right. Then another flash revealed the man in white, darting across the road directly in front of my car. But the movement was wrong. It was too fast, almost blurred, and yet I could make out his face clearly for a split second. Sunken eyes in a gaunt face, mouth slightly open. I jerked the wheel hard to avoid hitting him. This time, I couldn't recover. My car skidded sideways, then spun completely around before the passenger side slammed into a tree. The impact wasn't severe. My airbags didn't even deploy, but it was enough to crumple my door and blow out the tire. I sat there in shock for several minutes. The engine stalled, rain hammering on the roof. My phone showed no service, typical for these back roads. I was stranded. Looking through the rain-streaked windows, I could see nothing but darkness and the occasional lightning flash illuminating the empty road and surrounding trees. No sign of the man in white. I was stuck there, alone, with no way to call for help. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only about 20 minutes, I noticed headlights approaching from behind. Relief washed over me until I remembered the figure I'd seen. What if whoever stopped wasn't there to help? What if it was somehow connected to the man in white? The vehicle slowed as it approached, high beams cutting through the rain. It pulled up behind me and stopped. I couldn't see who was inside through my fogged-up windows and the rain. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then I heard a car door slam and saw a flashlight beam bouncing toward me. A heavy knock on my window made me jump. "You all right in there?" I nearly cried with relief when I recognized my dad's voice. I rolled down the window, rain immediately spattering my face. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "You weren't answering your phone. Your mother got worried when the storm hit, so I decided to drive out and make sure you got through all right." He peered past me at the damage. What happened? I couldn't tell him the truth. Not yet. It sounded too crazy. Lost control on the wet road. Hit the tree. He helped me out and we assessed the damage. The car wasn't going anywhere with the blown tire and crumpled door. We transferred my overnight bag to his truck and climbed in, the heater blasting against the chill that had settled into my bones. As we pulled away, I couldn't help but look back at the spot where I'd seen the figure dart across the road. Nothing but darkness. We drove in silence for a while, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. Finally, I couldn't contain it anymore. "Dad, did you see anyone walking along the road on your way here?" He glanced at me, then back at the road. "In this weather?" "No." "Why?" I hesitated, then told him everything. The man in white appearing in the middle of the road, then again at the tree line, and finally darting in front of my car with that unnatural speed. I expected him to dismiss it, to say I was seeing things because of the poor visibility. Instead, he grew quiet, his face becoming serious in the dim light from the dashboard. "They say these old roads have their fair share of lost souls," he finally said, his voice low, "especially during storms." "What do you mean, lost souls?" I asked, a chill running down my spine that had nothing to do with my wet clothes. "There are stories in Blackwater County, local legends about spirits that appear during bad weather. Some say they're trying to warn travelers. Others think they're reliving their final moments." He shrugged, but I could tell by the set of his shoulders that he wasn't as casual about this as he was trying to appear. "Do you believe those stories?" I pressed. He was silent for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "I've been on these roads for 5 years now, seen some things I can't explain." We drove the rest of the way to their house in silence. I spent the night there, sleeping fitfully, dreaming of pale faces in the rain. The next morning was clear and sunny, as if the previous night's storm had never happened. Dad arranged for a tow truck to retrieve my car, and I called work to let them know I'd be out for the day. Still shaken by the experience, I decided to stop by the Blackwater County Sheriff's Office. I don't know what I expected, to file a report about a ghost, but I needed some kind of explanation, something rational to hang on to. The station was small, just a brick building with a few patrol cars parked outside. Inside, a middle-aged officer named Jenkins was at the front desk. I explained I'd had an accident the night before because I swerved to avoid hitting someone on Route 16. "Did you get a look at them?" he asked, pulling out a form. I hesitated. Male, tall and thin, wearing all white. Jenkins stopped writing and looked up at me, his expression unreadable. "This was during the storm? Around what time?" "About 5 p.m. "Why?" He set his pen down and studied me. "Wait here a minute." He disappeared into a back room, returning a few minutes later with a yellowed newspaper clipping in a plastic sleeve. He handed it to me without a word. It was from the Blackwater County Herald, dated May 12, 1968. The headline read, "Missing man found dead after storm." Below was a grainy black and white photo of a tall, gaunt man in old-fashioned white clothing, the same man I'd seen on the road. My blood ran cold. This is him?" Jenkins nodded, unsurprised. His name was Edward Mercer, local doctor. Disappeared during a thunderstorm while making a house call to a patient with pneumonia. They found his body 3 days later in the woods off Route 16. The theory was he got disoriented in the storm, wandered off the road, and died of exposure. I stared at the photo, my mouth dry. But that was over 50 years ago. 55, Jenkins corrected, and you're not the first to report seeing him during storms. We get a couple of sightings every year, always during bad weather, always on that same stretch of road. You're saying I saw a ghost? The words felt ridiculous coming out of my mouth. Jenkins leaned back in his chair. I'm not saying anything official, but off the record, that stretch of Route 16 has more accidents during storms than any other road in the county, and a surprising number of drivers report seeing a man in white right before they crash. What does he want? I asked, immediately feeling foolish for the question. The officer's expression softened. Local legend says he's looking for something, or someone. Maybe trying to get to that patient he never reached. Maybe trying to find his way home. No one knows for sure. I handed the clipping back, my hands not entirely steady. Thanks. I appreciate you showing me this. Word of advice, Jenkins said as I turned to leave. A lot of locals avoid that stretch of Route 16 during storms, especially after dark. I nodded, unable to find words. It's been a month now. My car is repaired. My life has gone back to normal in most ways, but I haven't visited my parents since. We've talked on the phone, and I've made excuses about being busy with work. The truth is, I can't bring myself to drive that road again. Not yet. I keep seeing his face in my dreams, those hollow eyes, that expression, not threatening, but something else. Desperate, searching. I can't shake the feeling that he was trying to tell me something. The weather forecast shows clear skies for the next couple of weeks. Maybe I'll make the drive this weekend in broad daylight. But one thing's for certain, I'll never drive Route 16 during a storm again. And if you find yourself on those back roads when the sky darkens and the rain begins to fall, keep your eyes on the road ahead. And if you see a tall, thin man in white, well, I still don't know what to tell you to do. I just know what happened to me. And I know that whatever Edward Mercer is looking for after all these years, he's still out there searching, somewhere between this world and whatever comes after. I've never talked about this before. Not to anyone. Not even my wife knows the full story. But I need to get this off my chest because even after 20 years, I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about what happened that summer in Louisiana. I was 12 when my parents decided to move us from our comfortable suburban home in Atlanta to what felt like the absolute middle of nowhere in rural Louisiana. My dad had gotten a job offer that was too good to pass up, according to my mom. I didn't care about their reasons. All I knew was that I was being dragged away from my friends, my school, and everything I knew. The house they bought was this old wooden thing that creaked with every step. It was surrounded by woods so thick that sunlight barely penetrated through. Our nearest neighbor was over half a mile away, and the closest town was a 20-minute drive. I hated it immediately. The only good thing about the move was that we got to bring our golden retriever, Rusty. He was the best dog ever, loyal, friendly, always happy to see you. But something changed in him the moment we arrived at that house. He became different. The first night, Rusty wouldn't stop barking. He stood at the living room window, hackles raised, staring into the darkness of the woods. My dad tried to calm him down, but nothing worked. Mom thought maybe he was just stressed from the move, but I knew better. I could see the fear in his eyes. That first week, I spent most of my time unpacking and exploring the property during the day. I was too afraid to venture into the woods alone. There was something about them that made my skin crawl, like they were watching me. It was on our second Saturday there when we first met him. Dad and I were in the front yard, setting up a tire swing on this huge oak tree. Rusty was laying in the shade, keeping his distance from the tree line like he'd been doing since we arrived. I spotted him first, a thin figure walking up our long gravel driveway. As he got closer, I could make out more details. He was probably in his late 50s, with thinning gray hair that stuck to his forehead with sweat. His face was weathered, like old leather left too long in the sun. But it was his eyes that really got to me. They were empty somehow, cold, like looking into still water at night. "Morning," he said, his voice raspy like he hadn't used it in a while. "Y'all must be the new folks." My dad stopped what he was doing and walked over, extending his hand. "That's right. John Thompson. This is my son, Marcus." The man ignored my dad's hand, which made my dad immediately uncomfortable. I could tell by the way his shoulders tensed up. "Nolan Beauregard," the man said, looking past us at our house. "Live down the road a piece." I remember noticing that Rusty had gotten to his feet, his body rigid, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Dad noticed too and told me to take Rusty inside, but before I could, Nolan spoke again. "Wouldn't let that dog run loose around here. Woods ain't safe." "Is that right?" My dad's voice had that fake politeness he used when he didn't like someone. "Lots of things in them woods, things that ain't natural." Nolan's gaze shifted to me, and I swear the temperature dropped 10 degrees. "Boy looks like a wanderer. Should keep him close too." Dad stepped between us. "Well, thanks for the advice, Mr. Beauregard. We'll keep it in mind." Nolan just nodded, his eyes never leaving me. Then he turned and walked back down our driveway without another word. As soon as he was out of earshot, Dad turned to me. "Marcus, I want you to stay away from that man. You understand? Don't talk to him, don't go near his property, nothing." I nodded, relieved that Dad felt the same way I did about Nolan. There was something wrong about him, something that made my stomach twist into knots. That night, Rusty was worse than ever. He paced the house, whining and barking at the windows. Mom tried to let him out to do his business before bed, but he refused to step outside. He just stood at the door, trembling. I couldn't sleep. My bedroom was on the second floor, with a window that faced the woods. I kept thinking I heard noises outside, rustling, scratching. At one point I thought I heard whispers, but I told myself it was just the wind in the trees. Around 2 a.m., Rusty started barking frantically downstairs. I heard my dad get up, grumbling about that damn dog. I got out of bed and crept to my window, thinking maybe there was a raccoon or something outside that was setting Rusty off. What I saw instead made my blood freeze. There, standing in our yard, right at the edge where our mowed lawn met the forest, was Nolan Beauregard. But he looked different. His skin was ashen, almost gray in the moonlight. His eyes seemed hollow, like empty sockets. And he was smiling, this terrible wide grin that stretched his face in a way that didn't seem possible. He was staring directly at my window, at me. I blinked and he was gone. Just gone. Not like he ran away, but like he had never been there at all. I ran to my parents' room, nearly tripping over Rusty, who was now at the bottom of the stairs, barking at the front door. Dad was already pulling on his boots. "Dad!" I gasped. "I saw him. I saw Nolan in our yard." My father's face hardened. "Stay with your mother," he said, reaching into the closet for his shotgun. Mom was sitting up in bed looking terrified. "John, what's happening?" she asked. "Nothing. Probably just an animal. Marcus thought he saw something. I'm going to check it out." I followed Dad downstairs despite his instructions. Rusty was still barking, but he wouldn't go near the door. Dad flipped on the porch light and looked through the peephole before cautiously opening the door. He stepped outside, shotgun ready, and scanned the yard. I watched from the doorway as he walked the perimeter of our property, checking the tree line. When he came back, his face was a mix of anger and confusion. "There's nothing out there, Marcus. Not a footprint, nothing. But I saw him, Dad. He was right there, looking at my window." Dad put his hand on my shoulder. "It was probably just shadows, buddy. Your imagination playing tricks on you." But I could tell he didn't fully believe that. The next morning, Dad drove into town early. When he came back, he had a grim look on his face. That evening, after Mom had gone to bed, he sat me down in the kitchen. "Marcus, I need you to be honest with me. You're sure the man you saw said his name was Nolan Beauregard?" I nodded. "Yeah, I'm sure. Why?" Dad ran his hand through his hair. "I asked around town today. Nobody's ever heard of anyone by that name living in the area. Not now, not ever." My stomach dropped. "But he said he lived down the road." "I know what he said." Dad's voice was tight. "I drove every road within 5 miles of here. There's only 3 other houses, and none of them belong to anyone named Beauregard." "Then who was he?" I whispered. "I don't know, son." Dad looked older suddenly, tired. "But I think we need to be careful." The next few days were tense. Dad installed new locks on all the doors and windows. Mom thought he was overreacting, but she hadn't seen Nolan that night. She hadn't seen his impossible grin or those empty eyes. Rusty got worse. He stopped eating, lost weight. He would spend hours staring at the walls, growling at nothing. One night, he started throwing himself against the living room window, barking so ferociously that he foamed at the mouth. Dad had to physically restrain him. I started having nightmares. In them, I was lost in the woods, and I could hear someone calling my name. It was always Nolan's voice, but distorted somehow, like it was coming from underwater. Then came the night that changed everything. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it was coming from my parents' room, but as I became more alert, I realized it was coming from outside my window. Marcus Thompson. Come to the window, Marcus." I was paralyzed with fear. The voice was definitely Nolan's, but wrong somehow, like multiple voices speaking at once, all slightly out of sync. Against every instinct screaming at me to hide under my covers, I slowly got out of bed and approached the window. The whispering grew louder. "That's it, Marcus. Come see what's waiting." I pulled back the curtain just an inch and peered out. What I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. Nolan was floating. Not standing, floating. 3 feet off the ground outside my second-story window. His eyes were completely black now, like holes in his face. His mouth was stretched in that same impossible grin, but wider now, showing too many teeth that were long and sharp and wrong. "Found you, Marcus. Been looking so long. Come out and play." I screamed. I screamed like I've never screamed before or since. I fell backward onto the floor, scrambling away from the window. My parents burst into my room seconds later. Dad had his shotgun again. Mom ran to me, pulling me into her arms, while Dad went to the window. "He's out there! Nolan's out there!" I was sobbing, shaking uncontrollably. Dad looked out, then threw the window open and aimed his shotgun into the night. But after a moment, he lowered it, confusion on his face. "There's nothing there, Marcus." He was there. He was floating, his eyes. I couldn't continue, choking on my tears. Mom was rocking me, telling me it was just a nightmare, but I knew what I'd seen. And I think Dad did too, because he didn't go back to bed that night. He sat in a chair by my bedroom door until dawn, shotgun across his lap. In the morning, we found Rusty dead on the back porch. There wasn't a mark on him. The vet later said it was heart failure, but I knew better. Rusty had been terrified to death. That was it for my parents. We packed only what we needed and left that same day. Dad called his boss and quit over the phone. We drove straight through to my grandparents' house in Tennessee, not stopping except for gas. We never went back for our things. Dad hired a company to pack up the house and sell it. We never talked about what happened there, about Nolan Beauregard or the things I saw. It was like an unspoken agreement. If we didn't mention it, maybe it wasn't real. But I know it was real. Sometimes, even now, I'll wake up in the middle of the night and hear whispering outside my window. Marcus. Still looking for you, Marcus. I've researched the area where we lived. Turns out there are dozens of missing persons cases in those woods going back over 100 years. Most of them kids. And in a few old newspaper articles from the 1960s, I found a story about a local man who claimed to have been terrorized by a neighbor who didn't exist. The man ended up killing himself. His name was Beauregard, Nolan Beauregard Sr. I don't know what was in those woods. I don't know what Nolan was. A ghost, a demon, something else entirely. All I know is that he was real, and sometimes I think he's still looking for me. If you're ever driving through rural Louisiana and a thin man with gray hair and cold eyes introduces himself as Nolan Beauregard, don't stop. Don't talk to him. Just drive away as fast as you can, because he's not a man at all. And once he knows your name, he never stops looking for you. I can't believe I'm finally putting this down in words. My hands are still trembling just thinking about it, but I need to get this out. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can make sense of what happened to us. My wife Gianna and I had been saving for years to buy our first home. We were sick of renting and wanted something with character. Not one of those cookie-cutter houses in new developments. When our realtor showed us this beautiful 1920s craftsman in Oak Ridge, we instantly fell in love. The woodwork alone was stunning. Original oak trim, built-in bookshelves, a gorgeous staircase with hand-carved balusters. The listing described it as having good bones, which was realtor speak for needs work but has potential. We closed on the house in April and spent the first few days just moving boxes and figuring out where everything would go. The previous owners, an older couple named the Hendersons, had lived there for about 15 years before downsizing to a condo. They seemed nice enough during the closing, though Mrs. Henderson had this weird, almost apologetic look when she handed over the keys. It was on our 5th day in the house when we found it. I was helping Gianna move this massive antique cabinet into the hallway upstairs when we noticed something behind it. The wall looked different. There was a slight change in the paneling pattern. When we pushed the cabinet further away, we discovered a narrow door, painted the same color as the wall. It was easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. "Did you know this was here?" Gianna asked, running her hand along the edge of the door. I shook my head. The door wasn't on any of the floor plans we'd received, and the home inspector hadn't mentioned it either. The handle was old brass, tarnished almost black. Looking back, I wish we'd just left it alone, put the cabinet back, and pretended we never saw it. But curiosity got the better of us. The door opened with a creak that seemed to echo through the entire house. Behind it was a small room, maybe 8-10 feet. Unlike the rest of the house, which was well maintained despite its age, this room looked neglected. The wallpaper was peeling in long strips, exposing bare plaster underneath. The hardwood floor was dull and covered in a thin layer of dust that showed no footprints before ours. The room contained only 2 items: a wooden chair with one broken leg leaning against the far wall, and a cracked mirror hanging next to it. The temperature in there was noticeably colder than the rest of the house, even though it was spring and fairly warm outside. But the worst part was the smell. It's hard to describe. Musty and metallic, like old pennies mixed with wet cardboard. It wasn't overwhelming, just wrong. "I don't like this," Gianna whispered, gripping my arm. I knew exactly what she meant. It wasn't fear exactly, more like the feeling you get when you realize you've walked into someone's bedroom without permission, like we were intruding on something that wanted to remain private. We closed the door and finished moving the cabinet, though we positioned it differently so it didn't block the door completely. We tried to joke about our secret room over dinner that night, making plans to renovate it into a reading nook or small office. But neither of us seemed eager to go back in there. That night was when the noises started. It was subtle at first, the normal settling sounds old houses make. Creaks and groans that we dismissed as the building expanding and contracting with temperature changes. But then it became more distinct. Footsteps in the hallway when we were both downstairs, doors opening and closing by themselves, and sometimes, very faintly, what sounded like whispering. The first week we blamed it on being in a new place. "Just getting used to the house's sounds," I told Gianna when she mentioned hearing someone walking upstairs while I was in the shower. But it got worse. I started waking up at exactly 3:17 a.m. every night, heart pounding, with the absolute certainty that someone was standing in the hallway outside our bedroom. I'd lie there, paralyzed, listening to what sounded like slow breathing just beyond our door. Gianna experienced it too, though she would burrow under the covers and refuse to look. During the day, things would go missing only to reappear in strange places. My car keys ended up in the refrigerator. Gianna's favorite necklace, which she distinctly remembered putting in her jewelry box, turned up inside one of my work boots. The room at the end of the hallway seemed to be the center of it all. Even with the door closed, it felt like something dark was leaking out from under it, seeping into the rest of the house. Neither of us would walk past it alone anymore. We started using the bathroom downstairs rather than the one near that room. We began arguing over stupid things. The stress was getting to us. Gianna wanted to call someone, a priest, a medium, anyone who might understand what was happening. I insisted there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the house had some structural issue causing the noises. Maybe we were both suffering from stress-induced paranoia. One night, about 3 weeks after finding the room, I woke up to Gianna shaking me violently. "Nathan," she hissed, her voice tight with fear. "There's someone in the doorway." I rolled over and felt my blood turn to ice. Our bedroom door was open. I was certain we'd closed it before going to bed. And standing in the threshold was a tall, dark figure. It wasn't just a shadow. It had substance, but no discernible features. Just a human-shaped blackness that seemed to absorb the little bit of light coming from the nightlight in the hallway. It was watching us. I couldn't see eyes, but I felt its attention, focused and malevolent. I reached for the lamp on my nightstand, fumbling in the dark. When I finally hit the switch and light flooded the room, the figure was gone. But the coldness remained, along with that metallic smell we'd first noticed in the hidden room. Gianna was in tears. "We need to go. Now." We grabbed some essentials and drove to the nearest hotel. Neither of us slept that night. By morning, we were both exhausted and terrified, but I was also angry. We'd put everything we had into this house. It was supposed to be our dream home, not a nightmare. I decided to call the previous owners. I found Mr. Henderson's number in some of the paperwork from the sale and called him from the hotel lobby while Gianna took a shower. Mr. Henderson, this is Nathan Sullivan. My wife and I bought your house on Maple Street. There was a long pause before he answered. Yes, of course. Is something wrong with the house? I didn't know how to start. Would he think I was crazy? I decided to be direct. We found a room upstairs, behind where your cabinet was. A small room with a broken chair and mirror. Did you know about it? Another long silence. Then I heard him sigh. We should have told you, he said finally. Barbara wanted to, but I thought it might scare you off, and we really needed to sell the house. My stomach dropped. Tell me what? That room was sealed off when we bought the place 20 years ago. The previous owners had drywalled over the door and papered over it. We found it during renovations, just like you did. Everything that happened always centered around that room. What do you mean, everything that happened? I asked, though I already knew. The noises, the feeling of being watched, objects moving, and sometimes, he trailed off. Sometimes what? Sometimes you'd see it, standing in hallways or doorways, just watching. I felt dizzy. Why didn't you leave? We tried, twice, but we always came back. The house, it's special. Even with everything that happened, we loved it there. For years, we just learned to live with it. It seemed less active if we stayed out of that room and kept it closed off. That's why we put the cabinet there. Who lived in the house before you? I asked. A family named Winters. They only stayed 2 years. Before them, it was vacant for almost a decade after an elderly woman died there. That's all I know. After hanging up, I sat in the lobby for a long time, trying to process everything. When I went back to our room, Gianna could tell something was wrong. What is it? She asked. I told her everything Henderson had said. She was quiet for a long time, then said something that surprised me. We need to go back. What? Why? Because it's our house, Nathan. We can't just abandon it. And running away clearly didn't work for the Hendersons. She was right. We'd put everything into this place. And something about what Henderson said resonated with me. Despite everything, the house was special. I didn't want to give up on it either. That afternoon we returned. The house felt different somehow, aware of our absence and our return. We went straight upstairs down the hallway to the narrow door. Together, we pushed it open. The room was exactly as we'd left it, except for one thing. The figure was there, standing in the corner, a tall shadow that seemed deeper and darker than should be possible in a room with a window. I felt Gianna trembling beside me, but she didn't run. Neither did I. Some strange calm had come over me, replacing the fear with determination. This is our home now, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. We're not leaving, and you don't belong here anymore. The shadow seemed to shift slightly, almost like it was tilting its head to consider my words. Whatever you are, whatever happened to you, it's over, I continued. You need to go. For several long moments, nothing happened. Then, gradually, the figure began to fade, becoming less substantial until it was just a slight darkening in the corner, then nothing at all. The oppressive feeling that had permeated the room lifted, like air rushing in when a vacuum seal breaks. Gianna gripped my hand so hard it hurt. Is it gone? I honestly didn't know, but I nodded anyway. I think so. We spent that night in the house, sleeping with our bedroom door open and lights on. Nothing appeared in our doorway. The footsteps and whispers were gone. The house felt lighter somehow. Over the next few weeks, we cleaned out the small room, stripped the old wallpaper, and repainted it. We replaced the broken chair with a comfortable reading chair and got rid of the cracked mirror. Slowly, it became just another room in our house. That was 6 months ago. We still live here, and most days I don't even think about what happened. Occasionally, I feel a slight chill when passing what we now call the study, but it doesn't frighten me anymore. Gianna says she never feels or sees anything unusual now, but sometimes I wonder. Sometimes when I'm alone in the house, I catch movement from the corner of my eye or feel like someone's watching me from a doorway. But whatever it is, it keeps its distance. It's like we've reached an understanding. I still have questions that keep me up at night. Who was the figure? What happened in this house? Are there others still here, watching from within the walls? And most troubling, did it really leave? Or did it just retreat somewhere deeper in the house, waiting? I don't know if I'll ever have answers. All I know is this is our home now. For better or worse, we're staying. I never believed in ghosts. I always thought those shows on TV where people claimed to have seen apparitions were just attention-seeking nonsense. I was the guy who'd laugh at ghost stories around campfires and roll my eyes at friends who got freaked out by creaky floorboards. That changed when I moved into the old house on Maple Street. Let me back up a bit. I'm Cameron, 34, recently divorced and looking for a fresh start. When my realtor showed me the Victorian-style house in Millfield, I fell in love with it immediately. Sure, it needed work, chipped paint, squeaky floors, outdated fixtures, but it had character. The kind of character you don't find in those cookie-cutter suburban developments. The price was ridiculously low for a 3-bedroom house with a full basement. My realtor mentioned that the previous owner had passed away, and the family was eager to sell. I didn't think much of it at the time. People die, houses get sold. It's the circle of life, right? The closing process went smoothly, and I moved in on a Saturday in early October. The weather was perfect, cool enough to keep me from sweating as I carried boxes inside, but warm enough that I could leave the windows open to air out the musty smell. I spent that first week unpacking and making the place mine. I threw out some old furniture that had been left behind, including this ancient wooden rocking chair from the basement that was falling apart. It was covered in cobwebs and looked like it hadn't been used in decades. I figured no one would miss it. Everything was normal until I started noticing something weird. Every day when I'd leave for work, I'd lock the front door. I'm paranoid about that kind of thing. I always double-check. But when I'd come home, the door would be unlocked. The first time, I figured I must have been distracted and forgotten. The second time, I thought maybe the lock was faulty. By the 5th day, I was starting to freak out a little. I even took a video of myself locking the door one morning just to prove I wasn't losing my mind. Then came last Friday. I got home from work around 6 p.m., and not only was my door unlocked, it was slightly open, just a couple inches, but definitely open. My heart started racing. Had someone broken in? I stood on the porch, debating whether to call the police or check it out myself. Against my better judgment, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Nothing seemed disturbed. My laptop was still on the coffee table, my TV still mounted on the wall. I walked through each room with a kitchen knife in hand. Stupid, I know, but nothing was missing. No sign of forced entry, no messed up rooms, nothing. But something felt different. The air felt heavier somehow. Like when you walk into a room where people have been arguing and you can still feel the tension even though they've stopped. That's the best way I can describe it. As I stood in the kitchen trying to figure out what to do next, I heard it. A faint creaking sound, rhythmic and slow, coming from the basement. Creak, pause. Wait, creak, pause. It was unmistakable. the sound of a rocking chair. My first thought was that someone had broken in and was now hiding in my basement. My second thought was to get the hell out of there and call the police. But something compelled me to check it out. Maybe it was foolish pride, or maybe it was genuine curiosity, but I found myself walking toward the basement door. The wooden steps groaned under my weight as I descended into the dimly lit basement. The single bulb hanging from the ceiling cast long shadows across the concrete floor. The creaking got louder with each step. When I reached the bottom, I saw it. In the far corner of the basement was a rocking chair. Not just any rocking chair, the rocking chair. The same one I had thrown out during my first week. I recognized the distinctive carved pattern on the backrest, the worn armrests, even the small chip in one of the legs. It was gently rocking back and forth, as if someone had just gotten up from it. There was no draft in the basement. No windows were open. Nothing that could explain the movement. I stood frozen, staring at the chair as it slowly came to a stop. I don't know how long I stayed there, but eventually I backed up the stairs, locked the basement door, and poured myself a stiff drink. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the chair, about how it had somehow found its way back into my house. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe I hadn't actually thrown it out. Maybe someone found it by the curb and returned it as a prank. None of these explanations felt right, but they were better than the alternative. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again. Creak, pause, creak, pause. Coming from the basement, I pulled the covers over my head like a scared kid, but the creaking continued, steady and insistent. After about 20 minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. This time, I took my phone to record whatever I found. The basement was colder than it should have been, much colder than the rest of the house. My breath came out in small clouds as I descended the stairs. The creaking stopped as soon as I opened the door, but the chair wasn't empty this time. Sitting in the rocking chair was an elderly woman. Her skin was pale and wrinkled, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore a faded floral dress that looked like it was from another era. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead at the wall. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, phone forgotten at my side, watching her. After what felt like an eternity, she slowly turned her head to look at me. Her eyes were cloudy, almost milky, but they fixed on me with surprising intensity. Her lips moved as if she was trying to speak, but no sound came out. Then she was gone. Between one blink and the next, the chair was empty, still rocking slightly as if she had just stood up. I ran back upstairs so fast I nearly fell. I spent the rest of the night on my couch with all the lights on, too terrified to go back to sleep. The next morning, in the harsh light of day, I tried to convince myself it had been a dream or a hallucination from lack of sleep, but I knew what I had seen. I needed answers. I started with my neighbors, casually asking about the previous owner of my house. Most didn't know much, but Mrs. Kelly, the elderly woman next door, was a gold mine of information. The previous owner was Eleanor Martin, a widow who had lived in the house for over 50 years. According to Mrs. Kelly, Eleanor had been a quiet woman who kept to herself after her husband died in the 70s. She passed away in the house about 3 months before I moved in. Natural causes, Mrs. Kelly told me over coffee on her porch. Found in that old rocking chair of hers. It was her favorite spot, a gift from her husband on their first anniversary. She used to sit in it for hours, just rocking and looking out the window. My blood ran cold. Do you know what happened to the chair after she died? Mrs. Kelly shrugged. Her son took care of everything. Nice man. Lives about an hour away. Thomas Martin, I think. It took some digging, but I found Thomas Martin's contact information. I called him, making up a story about finding some old photos in the house that I thought he might want. He agreed to meet me that afternoon. Thomas was in his early 60s, with the same gray eyes I had seen in his mother's ghostly face. When I finally worked up the courage to ask about the rocking chair, his expression changed. "How do you know about the chair?" he asked, his voice tight. I told him I had found it in the basement, leaving out the part about the ghostly apparition of his mother. He sighed heavily. "We tried to get rid of that damn chair 3 times. First I put it out for the garbage collectors, but when I came back to do a final walkthrough of the house, it was back in the living room. Then I took it to the dump myself, watched them throw it in the compactor. A week later, when I came to meet with the realtor, it was in the basement. The 3rd time, I took it to my workshop and burned it, watched it turn to ash. But when I went back to the house the next day, it was back," I finished for him. He nodded. "Mom loved that chair more than anything. Dad gave it to her when they first bought the house. She sat in it every day until she died in it. The paramedics found her there, peaceful, like she'd just fallen asleep." He looked at me intently. "Has anything strange happened in the house?" I wanted to tell him everything. The unlocked doors, the creaking in the night, his mother's ghost, but I held back. I didn't want him to think I was crazy. "Just curious about the chair," I said. Thomas didn't seem convinced, but he didn't push it. Before leaving, he handed me a small box of his mother's things that he thought I might want. Old photos of the house, some documents about renovations done over the years, and a journal. That night, I read Eleanor's journal. Most entries were mundane. Notes about gardening, recipes, observations about neighbors who had long since moved away or passed on. But the last few entries caught my attention. "I know my time is coming," she had written 3 weeks before her death. "I'm not afraid. James is waiting for me, but I worry about the house. 53 years I've lived here. It's more than walls and a roof. It's part of me. I hope whoever comes next will love it as much as I have." The final entry was brief. "I'll always be here watching over this place. No one will take me from my home." It was weird and unsettling, but it also gave me a strange sense of understanding. Eleanor wasn't trying to scare me. She was just protecting what she loved. That night, I went down to the basement again. The rocking chair sat motionless in the corner. I pulled up a folding chair and sat facing it. "Eleanor," I said, feeling slightly ridiculous talking to an empty chair, "I want you to know that I understand this is your home. I'm not here to take it from you. I just want to live here too. You don't have to unlock the door. I'm not going anywhere. And you don't need to hide in the basement. This is your house as much as it is mine." Nothing happened at first. Then, slowly, the chair began to rock, just slightly, back and forth. No one was in it, but I could feel a presence. The air around me felt warmer, almost comforting. For the first time since moving in, I wasn't afraid. The next morning, I moved the rocking chair upstairs to the living room, placing it by the window where the sun could reach it. It seemed right somehow, like that's where it belonged. It's been 2 weeks since then. I haven't seen Eleanor again, but sometimes, usually in the quiet hours of early morning or late evening, I hear the gentle creaking of her chair. The doors stay locked now when I leave, and the house feels peaceful. Not empty, but not crowded either, like we've reached an understanding. I still don't know if I believe in ghosts, not in the traditional sense, but I believe Eleanor is still here, watching over the home she loved for over 50 years. And honestly, I'm okay with that. This house has enough room for both of us. Sometimes I sit in my armchair across from her rocking chair and talk about my day, my plans for renovating the kitchen, anything really. I don't know if she can hear me, but the chair always seems to rock a little more steadily when I do, as if she's listening. I've never told anyone else about this. They'd think I was crazy. But I know what I experienced, and I know she's still here, not as something frightening, but as a guardian of sorts. The previous owner who never really left, and maybe never will, and that's okay with me. I still can't sleep without checking every closet, door, and crawl space in my apartment. It's been 3 years since I fled that house, but the nightmares haven't stopped. I've never shared this with anyone except the police, who clearly thought I was either crazy or on drugs. I need to get this off my chest, even if no one believes me. Last month, I saw in the local paper that my old house, my first and only home purchase, finally sold after sitting vacant for years. The article mentioned the steep discount due to the property's troubled history. Troubled history. What a joke. They have no idea. It all started when I was 28 and finally saved enough for a down payment. After months of searching, I found this Victorian-style house in a quiet neighborhood just outside of town. It wasn't perfect. Peeling paint, some water damage in the kitchen, outdated bathroom, but it had character and, more importantly, it was in my price range. The real estate agent mentioned it had been on the market for a while because it needed cosmetic updates, but the inspection didn't show any major structural issues. The previous owners were an elderly couple who had moved to Florida to be closer to their grandkids. They left behind some old furniture and boxes in the attic that they didn't want to haul across the country. The agent said I could keep what I wanted and trash the rest. I was actually grateful since I didn't have much furniture of my own. I spent the first 2 days painting the living room and setting up my bedroom. The attic was the last thing on my mind. I'd glanced up there briefly during the home tour. It was full of dust-covered boxes, old picture frames, and a couple of antique chairs. Nothing special, nothing that seemed urgent to deal with. On my third night, I was half asleep watching TV when I heard it. A faint scratching sound, like nails on drywall. At first, I thought it was coming from outside, maybe tree branches against the house, but it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. I muted the TV and listened more carefully. The scratching was definitely coming from above me, from the attic. My first thought was mice or maybe a raccoon that had found its way in through a vent. I tried to ignore it and go back to my show, but the scratching continued, getting slightly louder. After about 20 minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. If I had rodents, I needed to deal with it before they caused damage. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and reluctantly made my way to the pull-down attic stairs in the hallway. The scratching had stopped by the time I reached the top of the stairs, but I was already there, so I figured I might as well check it out. The attic was pitch black except for the beam of my flashlight. It was colder than the rest of the house, and the air had that musty, undisturbed smell that old attics have. I moved the light across stacked cardboard boxes, old suitcases, and what looked like painting canvases covered in sheets. Nothing seemed disturbed, no droppings or chewed materials that would indicate rodents. I was about to head back down when the scratching started again. It was coming from the far corner of the attic, behind a stack of framed paintings leaning against the wall. I made my way carefully through the cluttered space, stepping over boxes and around furniture. When I moved the paintings aside, I froze. There was a small wooden door in the wall, maybe 3 feet tall and 2 feet wide, that I hadn't noticed during my initial walkthrough of the house. It wasn't on any of the floor plans I'd received. The scratching was definitely coming from behind it. I stood there for a good minute, debating whether to open it. The logical part of my brain said it was probably just an access panel to some part of the roof, or maybe storage space built into the eaves. But something about it felt wrong. The door looked older than the rest of the attic, with a tarnished brass handle and wood that was darker, more weathered. The scratching continued, now more frantic. If it was an animal trapped in there, I needed to let it out. I took a deep breath, grabbed the handle, and pulled the door open. My flashlight revealed a narrow passageway, barely wide enough for an adult to crawl through. It extended about 10 feet before opening into what looked like a small room. The wallpaper inside was faded floral print, peeling in places. There was a small, metal-framed bed with a thin, stained mattress. A couple of old books sat on a tiny nightstand, and there, hunched in the corner, was a woman. She was facing the wall, her bony fingers scratching at the wallpaper. Her hair was long and matted, hanging in dirty clumps down her back. She wore what might have once been a white nightgown, now yellowed and torn. I could see her spine through the thin fabric, each vertebra protruding sharply. I didn't know what to do. Was she a squatter? Homeless? But how would she have gotten in without me noticing? I cleared my throat, thinking maybe I could talk to her, offer help. "Excuse me?" My voice came out as a whisper. She stopped scratching. For a moment everything was completely silent. Then, slowly, she turned around. I'll never forget her face as long as I live. Her skin was so pale it was almost translucent, stretched tight over her skull. Her cheeks were sunken hollows. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. But it was her eyes that made me step back in horror. They were wild, desperate, and somehow ancient, sunken deep into dark sockets but blazing with a terrible hunger. She didn't speak. She opened her mouth, revealing blackened gums and jagged teeth, and let out a sound that wasn't human, a high-pitched scream that seemed to reverberate inside my head rather than my ears. Before I could react, she lunged toward me. I don't know how someone who looked so frail could move so fast, but suddenly she was at the entrance to the passageway, her gnarled fingers reaching for me. I stumbled backward, tripping over a box and dropping my flashlight. It rolled away, casting crazy shadows across the attic. I scrambled to my feet and ran for the attic stairs, not daring to look back. I could hear her behind me, that terrible screaming mixed with a sound like bare feet slapping against the wooden floor. I practically fell down the attic stairs, pulled them up, and locked them in place. The whole mechanism shook as something slammed against it from above. I ran straight out the front door without grabbing my keys, my wallet, or even putting on shoes. I didn't stop until I reached my car, which thankfully I'd left unlocked. I jumped in, locked the doors, and sat there shaking for what must have been hours. Every few minutes, I'd look up at the house, half expecting to see that woman's face in one of the windows, but there was nothing. I spent the night in my car, too terrified to go back inside. When the sun finally came up, I drove to the nearest gas station, used their phone to call the police. My cell was still in the house, and waited there until they arrived. 2 officers showed up about 20 minutes later. I must have sounded completely insane as I told them about the hidden room and the woman. They exchanged looks but agreed to check it out. I waited in the police car while they went inside. After about 45 minutes, they came back out. They'd found the small door and the hidden room, but there was no woman. No evidence anyone had been living there at all. The bed was there, and the nightstand with books, exactly as I'd described, but the mattress was covered in dust, undisturbed for what looked like years. There were no scratches on the walls, no footprints in the dust on the attic floor except for mine and now theirs. One of the officers suggested it might have been a squatter who fled when they heard the police coming, but couldn't explain how they would have gotten out without being seen. The other hinted that maybe I'd been working too hard or had some kind of waking nightmare. They took my statement, but clearly didn't believe me. I went back into the house with them, but I couldn't bring myself to go up to the attic again. They offered to do a complete sweep of the property, which I accepted, but they found nothing unusual. Before they left, one officer mentioned that old houses sometimes had rooms like that, servant quarters or storage spaces that weren't included in modern floor plans. I tried to convince myself they were right. Maybe I'd seen a homeless person who'd been squatting in my attic and ran off. Maybe I'd worked myself up with too many horror movies and an overactive imagination. I spent that night at a hotel but forced myself to return the next day. I couldn't just abandon my new house, not after emptying my savings account to buy it. For the next few days, I tried to live normally. I kept the attic stairs locked and pushed a bookshelf in front of them for good measure. I told myself it was over, but it wasn't. At night, I'd hear the scratching again, sometimes from the attic, sometimes from inside the walls. I'd wake up feeling like someone was standing over my bed, but when I turned on the light, no one was there. I started having nightmares about the woman, about being trapped in that tiny room with her, about her decayed fingers reaching for my face. The breaking point came 5 days after the initial incident. I was taking a shower when I felt something watching me. I pulled back the curtain, and there she was, standing in the bathroom doorway, more solid and real than before. Water ran into my eyes, and when I wiped it away, she was gone. But that was enough. I packed a suitcase with essentials, called a buddy to help me get the rest of my important stuff the next day in broad daylight, and checked into an extended stay hotel. I never spent another night in that house. I contacted a realtor the following week and listed the house, disclosing there was a possible pest problem in the attic, but nothing about what I'd seen. I took a massive financial hit selling it so quickly, but I didn't care. I just wanted to be free of it. The house sat empty for 3 years before someone finally bought it. I've thought about contacting the new owners, warning them, but what would I say? Watch out for the ghost woman in the secret attic room? They'd think I was nuts. I've done research since then. The elderly couple I bought it from had only lived there for 5 years. Before them, the house had changed hands frequently, never staying with one owner for more than a few years. I couldn't find any records of deaths in the house or missing persons associated with the address, but the county records only went back to the 1950s. I still don't know who or what that woman was. Was she once a real person trapped in that room, who died there and couldn't move on? Was she something that was never human to begin with? I don't have answers. All I know is that I still hear scratching sometimes, even in my new apartment across town. It's faint, like it's coming from very far away, but it's the same rhythm, the same desperate cadence. And sometimes when I'm drifting off to sleep, I swear I can feel bony fingers brushing against my cheek. I won't ever own another house with an attic. I check every closet, every cabinet, every space where something could hide. I keep all the lights on until I absolutely have to turn them off to sleep. And I never, ever ignore strange noises at night. The woman in the attic is still out there. Sometimes I wonder if she followed me. Sometimes I wonder if she's still in that hidden room, waiting for the next person to find her. And sometimes I wonder if she was never really there at all. If something in that house just got inside my head and showed me my worst fears. But then I remember her face when she turned around. The hunger in those ancient eyes, the inhuman scream. And I know she was real. As real as the scratching I sometimes still hear in the walls at night.